The road climbs steadily through the mountains of Costa Rica's Tilarán Range, winding upward from the Pacific lowlands through zones of increasingly dense vegetation. The air changes as elevation increases, growing cooler, heavier with moisture. The brilliant tropical sunshine that bathed the coast begins to fade, filtered through thickening layers of atmosphere. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, the mist begins. It appears as wisps at first, tendrils of cloud drifting across the road, there and then gone, like thoughts half-formed. But as the road continues its ascent, the mist thickens, becoming more persistent, until finally it surrounds everything, envelops everything, becomes the very medium through which the world is experienced. This is not rain, not exactly, though moisture hangs so thick in the air that exposed skin becomes damp within minutes. This is cloud, but cloud encountered not from above or below, but from within. Cloud as habitat, cloud as the defining characteristic of an entire ecosystem. Welcome to Monteverde, the green mountain, where clouds meet forest and create something found nowhere else on Earth. The first breath of cloud forest air is unlike any other. It is cool without being cold, perhaps 65 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, even in what passes for summer here. It is saturated with moisture, 90 or even 100% humidity, so that the air itself seems to have weight and presence. And it carries scents, the rich, loamy smell of decomposition, the green fragrance of growing things, the subtle perfume of orchids blooming somewhere in the invisible canopy above, and underneath it all, the ancient smell of moss and stone and water. The light in the cloud forest is soft, diffused, filtered through multiple layers of mist and vegetation until it takes on an almost underwater quality, green-tinted and directionless. Shadows are rare here, softened by the ever-present mist. Colors appear muted at first, but as the eye adjusts, they reveal themselves in unexpected richness. The deep emerald of moss, the russet of tree trunks beneath their living coatings, the sudden shock of a bright orange fungus or crimson flower emerging from the general greenness. Sound behaves differently in this dense, moist air. It is absorbed, muffled, so that even the calls of birds seem to come from everywhere and nowhere, difficult to locate, haunting in their disembodiment. Footsteps on the muddy trail are quiet, the soft ground accepting each step without echo. The constant drip of water from leaves, from branches, from the very air itself condensing on every surface creates a subtle background percussion, a reminder that in the cloud forest, water is not something that occasionally falls from the sky, but something that is always present, always moving through the system. To walk into Monteverde for the first time is to enter a world that seems more mythical than real, more dreamscape than landscape. The trees disappear upward into the mist, their tops invisible, their trunks clothed in such dense coverings of moss and ferns and bromeliads that the bark itself is hidden. Every horizontal surface, every branch, every fallen log, every stone is covered in green, coated with living things that have claimed every available space. The very air seems green, tinted by the light filtering through thousands upon thousands of leaves, by the mist reflecting back the dominant color of the forest. This is a forest that grows not just upward from the soil, but outward from every surface. A three-dimensional complexity that defies easy comprehension. Life here is layered, stacked, interwoven in ways that create ecosystems within ecosystems, worlds within worlds. A single tree might support hundreds of other plant species, each of which might host insects, frogs, birds, creating a vertical tower of biodiversity that reaches from the dark forest floor to the sunlit canopy 60 or 80 feet above. The mist moves through the forest like a living thing, flowing between the trees, thickening and thinning, sometimes lifting enough that visibility extends 50 or 100 feet, sometimes closing in so
densely that trees only 10 feet away become ghostly shapes, more suggested than seen. This movement, this constant flux, gives the forest a quality of impermanence, of constant transformation. Nothing is ever quite the same twice. The forest revealed in a moment of clearing mist is different from the forest that was there moments before, different from the forest that will be there moments hence. And yet, underneath this apparent impermanence lies deep permanence. These trees have stood for centuries, some of them. The moss that coats them has grown millimeter by millimeter over decades. The ecological relationships that structure the cloud forest have been refined over millions of years of evolution. What seems like a dreamscape, ephemeral and shifting, is actually one of the most stable, most ancient, most complex ecosystems on the planet. The trail leads deeper into the forest, away from the road, away from the last sounds of human activity. The mist thickens, the green deepens, and somewhere in the canopy above, invisible in the clouds, a bird calls, a long, mournful note that echoes briefly before being absorbed by the mist. It could be any bird, but in Monteverde there is always the possibility, always the hope that it might be the bird, the one that brings people from around the world to walk these misty trails, the living embodiment of the cloud forest's mystery and beauty. The Resplendent Quetzal. Even the name sounds like something from legend rather than from ornithology, and in many ways it is legendary. A bird so beautiful that ancient civilizations considered it sacred, so rare and elusive that seeing one becomes a pilgrimage, so perfectly adapted to the cloud forest that it cannot survive anywhere else. But before we can understand the Quetzal, before we can appreciate why this particular bird has become the symbol of the cloud forest, we must first understand the forest itself, the extraordinary conditions that created it, the intricate web of relationships that sustain it, the delicate balance that maintain it. The cloud forest of Monteverde exists because of a unique combination of geographic and meteorological circumstances, a convergence of factors that creates conditions found in only a few places on Earth. To understand how a cloud forest forms, we must first understand the landscape and the winds that shape it. Costa Rica is a narrow country, a thin bridge of land connecting North and South America, with the Caribbean Sea to the east and the Pacific Ocean to the west. At its narrowest point, the distance from coast to coast is less than 75 miles. Running down the spine of the country is a range of mountains, volcanic in origin, rising from sea level to over 12,000 feet at their highest peaks. Monteverde sits on the Pacific slope of the Tillaran mountain range at elevations between approximately 4,000 and 5,500 feet. This positioning is critical. It places the forest at exactly the right elevation to intercept the moisture-laden clouds that form when warm air from the lowlands rises up the mountainside and cools. The process begins with the trade winds, those reliable atmospheric currents that flow from the northeast across the Caribbean Sea. These winds are warm and carry enormous amounts of moisture evaporated from the warm Caribbean waters. When these moisture-laden winds encounter the mountains of Costa Rica, they are forced upward in a process called orographic lift. As air rises, it expands and cools. Cool air cannot hold as much moisture as warm air, so as the air cools, the moisture it carries begins to condense, forming clouds. On the Caribbean side of the mountains, this process produces rainfall, lots of it. The Caribbean side of Costa Rica is one of the wettest places on Earth, receiving in some areas over 300 inches of rain annually.
But the winds don't stop at the peaks. They continue across the divide and down the Pacific slope, though by now much of their moisture has been wrung out. What's left, however, is still significant, especially in the form of clouds. And it is these clouds, formed by the lifting and cooling of the trade winds, that drift across the divide and encounter Monteverde. At Monteverde's elevation, the temperature and atmospheric conditions are perfect for the clouds to persist. They don't dissipate immediately as they might at higher elevations, nor do they rise above the forest as they would at lower elevations. Instead, they settle into the forest, becoming part of it, flowing through it, defining it. But the story is more complex still, because Monteverde doesn't receive moisture from only one direction. While the dominant pattern involves the northeast trade winds bringing Caribbean moisture, there are times, especially during the wet season from May through November, when weather systems from the Pacific side contribute moisture as well. This convergence of moisture from two oceans, mediated by the mountain barrier between them, creates conditions of extraordinary humidity. The result is that Monteverde is almost constantly bathed in cloud. The mist is not occasional or seasonal, it is perpetual, year-round, defining every aspect of the ecosystem. During the dry season, roughly December through April, when the Pacific lowlands receive almost no rain, Monteverde remains moist, the clouds continuing to drift through even when actual rainfall diminishes. During the wet season, the forest receives both rain and cloud, sometimes simultaneously, creating conditions of almost unimaginable humidity. The temperature stability at this elevation also contributes to the cloud forest's character. Unlike lowland tropical forests, where temperatures can vary significantly between day and night or between seasons, Monteverde maintains a relatively constant temperature year-round. Highs rarely exceed 75 degrees Fahrenheit, lows rarely drop below 60. This narrow temperature range, combined with the constant moisture, creates ideal conditions for certain types of plants and animals, while excluding others that require more temperature variation or drier conditions. The soil of the cloud forest tells its own story. Volcanic in origin, it is generally deep and fertile, capable of supporting the enormous productivity of the forest. But it is also constantly saturated with water, creating conditions where decomposition processes are slowed and where specialized drainage adaptations are necessary for survival. Many cloud forest plants have evolved aerial root systems or other mechanisms for dealing with the constant wetness that would rot the roots of less adapted species. The topography of Monteverde adds another layer of complexity. The forest doesn't exist on a simple slope, but across a varied landscape of ridges and valleys, exposed peaks and sheltered ravines. Each microhabitat experiences the clouds somewhat differently. Ridgetop forests, exposed to the full force of the wind-driven clouds, may be stunted and twisted, the trees shaped by constant buffeting. Valley forests, more sheltered, may grow taller and develop more complex canopy structures. North-facing slopes receive different amounts of sun than south-facing slopes, creating subtle variations in temperature and light that different species exploit. All of these factors, the trade winds, the orographic lift, the convergence of Caribbean and Pacific weather systems, the specific elevation range, the stable temperatures, the volcanic soils, the varied topography, all combine to create the conditions we call cloud forest. It is a precise recipe requiring exact ingredients in exact proportions. Change any one factor significantly and the ecosystem shifts, becoming something else. This precision makes cloud forests rare. Globally, they occupy less than 1% of the world's forested area. They exist only in specific mountain ranges at specific elevations in tropical and subtropical regions. Each cloud forest is unique, shaped by its particular combination of local conditions, yet all share the defining characteristic of persistent, low-level cloud cover. Monteverde is among the most famous and most studied of the world's cloud forests, partly because of its accessibility, partly because of the conservation efforts that have protected it, and partly because it represents the cloud forest ecosystem in particularly pure form. The conditions here are ideal, the biological diversity extraordinary, the ecosystem relatively intact despite increasing pressures. The clouds themselves are not uniform. Sometimes they arrive as dense fog that reduces visibility to a few feet and coats everything in fine droplets. Sometimes they are thinner, more like mist, allowing filtered sunlight to penetrate but still maintaining high humidity. Sometimes they lift partially, creating layers where the canopy emerges into clearer air while the understory remains shrouded. These variations in cloud density and behavior create further microhabitats and opportunities for specialization. The wind that drives the clouds also shapes the forest directly.
Trees on exposed ridges are pruned by the constant wind, growing in characteristic twisted forms, leaning away from the prevailing direction. Branches that extend too far into the wind path are broken off or die back, creating asymmetric crowns. The force of wind-driven mist sandblasts exposed surfaces, preventing certain lichens from establishing, while favoring others more tolerant of abrasion. But the wind also brings benefits. It disperses seeds, carries spores of fungi and ferns, transports pollen, and mixes the air, preventing stagnation and distributing nutrients. Some plants have evolved to take advantage of the wind, producing seeds with wing-like structures that allow them to glide to new locations, or sticky seeds that adhere to the wet feathers of birds moving through the canopy. The water that the clouds deliver to the forest comes in forms beyond just rain. Fog drip, the condensation of mist on leaves and branches, which then drips to the forest floor, can add the equivalent of 30 or more inches of precipitation annually, above and beyond actual rainfall. This horizontal precipitation, moisture delivered not from falling rain, but from moving mist, is one of the defining features of cloud forest hydrology. It means that even during dry spells, when rain doesn't fall for days or even weeks, the forest continues to receive moisture, continues to drip, continues to support the incredible abundance of moisture-dependent life. Every leaf in the canopy acts as a fog collector, its surface catching the tiny droplets suspended in the air, allowing them to coalesce into larger drops that eventually fall. The rougher the surface, the better it catches fog. Mosses, with their complex structure of tiny leaves and stems, are particularly effective fog catches, intercepting moisture and channeling it toward the tree trunks and roots. The forest, in effect, harvests water from the air, capturing and concentrating moisture that might otherwise simply blow through without leaving a trace. This captured water feeds the springs and streams that drain the mountainside, providing water resources far beyond what rainfall alone would supply. The streams that emerge from the cloud forest run clear and constant, fed by the continuous drip and seep of fog moisture, maintaining flow even during dry periods when other streams elsewhere have stopped running. This reliable water supply has been critical to human settlement in the region, providing drinking water and irrigation for the farms and communities below the forest.
The temperature inversion that often occurs in cloud forests adds yet another dimension to their complexity. Because cool, dense air sinks and warm air rises, there can be periods when the air in the valleys below Monteverde is actually warmer than the air at mid-elevations where the cloud forest exists. This creates a situation where the clouds are trapped, unable to rise, held in place by the layer of warmer air above them. During these conditions, the cloud forest can be completely socked in, while areas both above and below enjoy clearer skies. Understanding these physical and meteorological conditions helps explain why cloud forests are such biodiversity hotspots. The constant moisture, stable temperatures, and complex three-dimensional structure create more ecological niches, more opportunities for species to specialize than almost any other ecosystem on Earth. Every variation in light, moisture, temperature, or substrate becomes an opportunity for some organism to exploit, to adapt to make a living from. And it explains why cloud forests are so vulnerable to climate change. The precise conditions that create them, the elevation where clouds form, the temperature ranges, the patterns of trade winds, are all susceptible to disruption from changes in global climate. Raise the temperature even slightly and the cloud base rises, potentially moving above the forest, depriving it of its defining moisture source. Change the trade wind patterns and the reliable delivery of Caribbean moisture might be disrupted. These ecosystems exist in a narrow envelope of conditions, and even small changes to that envelope can have catastrophic effects. But for now, the clouds still flow through Monteverde, reliable as breath, constant as time. They drift between the trees, condense on every surface, drip steadily onto the forest floor. They create the conditions for life so abundant, so diverse, so intricate that a single tree can support more species than exist in entire temperate forests.
They make possible the hanging gardens, the aerial ecosystems, the vertical complexity that defines the cloud forest experience. The cloud forest is not a single habitat, but multiple habitats stacked vertically, a layered world where each stratum has its own character, its own community of organisms, its own rules of life and death. To understand Monteverde is to understand this vertical dimension, this architecture of life that extends from the dark, damp forest floor to the sunlit canopy 60, 80, sometimes 100 feet above. The forest floor in Monteverde is a world of constant twilight, even at midday. So little light penetrates through the dense canopy and the perpetual mist that the ground level exists in a state of permanent dimness. The temperature here is the coolest in the forest, the air movement minimal, blocked by the dense vegetation above. The ground itself is soft, spongy, covered with a thick layer of decomposing leaves, fallen branches, moss, and organic debris that has accumulated over decades or centuries. This layer of organic matter, called duff or humus, is in itself an ecosystem. Within it live countless organisms: bacteria, fungi, nematodes, mites, springtails, beetle larvae, all working to break down the dead material, to recycle the nutrients, to convert the fallen leaves and wood back into soil. The decomposition rate in tropical cloud forests is slower than in lowland rainforests, thanks to the cooler temperatures and supersaturated conditions, but it is still considerably faster than in temperate forests. A fallen leaf might take months to decompose, a branch years, a log decades. The duff layer acts as a sponge, absorbing and holding water, releasing it slowly to feed the streams and springs. Walking on it is like walking on a thick carpet, each step sinking slightly into the soft, yielding surface. In some areas, the duff can be a foot or more deep, the accumulation of years of leaf fall gradually building up, providing a substrate for ferns and mosses to root in, occasionally sprouting the seedlings of future forest giants. The herb layer, rising a few inches to a few feet above the ground, consists of ferns, small palms, broad-leaved herbs, and the seedlings and saplings of canopy trees waiting for their chance to grow. Many of these plants have evolved large leaves to capture as much of the limited light as possible. These leaves are often remarkably thin, fragile-seeming structures that would wilt immediately in direct sun, but that are perfectly adapted to the low-light, high-humidity conditions of the forest floor. Some plants here are ephemerals, living their entire lives in the brief period when a tree fall creates a gap in the canopy and sunlight temporarily reaches the ground. Others are long-lived shade specialists, capable of surviving for years or decades in near darkness, photosynthesizing just enough to stay alive, waiting for their opportunity. When a canopy tree finally falls, from age, from disease, from a storm, a race begins among these waiting seedlings to capitalize on the sudden availability of light. Some specialize fast growth, shooting upward quickly to claim the gap. Others prioritize building strong root systems or dense wood, sacrificing speed for long-term survival. Rising above the herb layer is the shrub and small tree layer, roughly 6 to 30 feet high. This zone receives somewhat more light than the forest floor, enough to support a different suite of plants. Here we find the understory trees, species that will never reach the canopy, but that have carved out a niche in the middle reaches of the forest. Some produce flowers and fruits at this level, feeding specialized pollinators and dispersers. Others are saplings of canopy species, adolescents waiting for their turn. The humidity in this layer is extreme, perhaps the highest in the forest. Sheltered from wind, but still enveloped in cloud, with constant drip from above, the shrub layer is a paradise for moisture-loving organisms. Ferns proliferate here, their fronds unfurling in perfect spirals, some species producing fronds 6 feet long. Tree ferns, prehistoric hangovers that have barely changed in millions of years, create their own subcanopy, their fibrous trunks crowned with radiating fronds. Then, rather suddenly, the character changes as we ascend into the main canopy, roughly 30 to 60 feet above the ground. Here, finally, there is light, not the full tropical blast that would occur in an open area, but filtered, diffused light that is nonetheless dramatically brighter than the gloom below. Here, too, there is wind, the moving air that drives the clouds through the forest, creating movement and mixing. The canopy is where the greatest diversity occurs. This is the interface between the forest and the atmosphere, where the most energy is available, where the most ecological niches exist. The canopy trees themselves are diverse, dozens of species, each with its own growth form, its own leaf structure, its own flowering and fruiting schedule. Some are deciduous, losing their leaves for a brief period each year. Most are evergreen, maintaining their foliage year-round. All are festooned with epiphytes, plants that grow on them without rooting in soil. The branches of canopy trees create a complex, three-dimensional structure of perches, pathways, and platforms. Some are thick and horizontal, capable of supporting large animals. Others are thin and flexible, suitable only for small birds or insects. The arrangement is not random, but reflects each tree's strategy for capturing light, for positioning leaves to maximize photosynthesis while minimizing damage from wind. And covering everything, absolutely everything, is moss. The branches are coated in it, inches thick in some places, creating a soft green landscape that drips constantly. The moss holds moisture like a sponge, providing habitat for insects, frogs, salamanders, and countless invertebrates. It acts as a nursery for orchid and fern seeds, giving them a place to germinate and establish themselves before they develop their own root systems. Within the main canopy, there are further subdivisions. The lower canopy, where branches first emerge into significant light, differs from the mid-canopy, where competition for light is most intense, which differs again from the upper canopy, where the tallest trees reach above their neighbors. Each sublayer supports different species, different adaptations.
And finally, there is the emergent layer, the tops of the very tallest trees that push above the general canopy level, breaking through into fuller sun and stronger wind. These emergent giants, sometimes reaching 80 or even 100 feet tall, experience conditions dramatically different from the forest below. They receive more light, more wind, more temperature fluctuation. Their topmost branches may actually dry out during sunny afternoons, a condition never experienced in the layers below. Lightning strikes tend to hit these tallest trees, leaving scars and sometimes killing them outright. But being an emergent also offers advantages. More light means more photosynthesis, more energy for growth and reproduction. Better wind exposure means better seed dispersal. And the position above the canopy makes emergent trees visible to birds and bats from long distances, potentially increasing pollination and fruit dispersal. This vertical stratification creates what ecologists call forest within forest. Multiple distinct habitats occupying the same footprint of land, but separated vertically. An organism living on the forest floor might never encounter an organism living in the emergent layer, even though they are separated by only 70 or 80 feet. They might as well be living in different ecosystems, different worlds. Many cloud forest animals exploit this vertical dimension, moving between layers as resources dictate. Birds might forage in the canopy but nest in the understory. Frogs might spend their adult lives in the canopy but must return to the forest floor to breed. Insects might emerge from the soil, live as adults in the canopy, then return to lay eggs in the duff layer. These vertical migrations connect the layers, transferring nutrients and energy between them. The vertical structure also creates protection from extremes. The canopy shields the forest floor from direct sun, from hard rain, from strong wind. The forest floor buffers the canopy against temperature extremes, releasing moisture and maintaining humidity. The middle layers mediate between the two, creating gradients rather than sharp transitions. This layering is not perfectly distinct. There are blurred boundaries, mixed zones, areas where one layer grades into another. Nor is it uniform across the forest. In valleys, where conditions are more sheltered, the layering might be more pronounced, with distinct strata clearly visible. On ridges, where wind exposure is greater, the forest might be more compressed, the layers telescope together.
But despite these variations, the fundamental pattern holds. Cloud forests are vertical worlds, structured in layers, each layer offering different conditions, different opportunities, different challenges. To truly know Monteverde, one must know it not just horizontally by walking the trails, but vertically by understanding how life is distributed from ground to sky. And it is primarily in the canopy, in those middle and upper layers where light and moisture meet in perfect balance, that we find the cloud forest's most characteristic feature, the epiphytes, the plants that have abandoned the ground entirely and colonized the aerial realm, creating hanging gardens of extraordinary diversity and beauty. In most forests, plants grow in the ground, their roots penetrating soil, drawing water and nutrients from the earth. But in the cloud forest, this rule is broken spectacularly and repeatedly. Here, a significant percentage of plant species, perhaps 30 or 40% of all plant diversity, never touches the ground, growing instead on the branches and trunks of trees, suspended in mid-air, deriving everything they need from atmosphere alone. These are the epiphytes, from the Greek epi, upon, and phyton, plant, plants growing upon plants. They are not parasites. They do not draw nutrients from their host trees. They simply use the trees as platforms, as ways to access light and space without having to invest in growing their own trunks from the ground up. In the cloud forest, where competition for light at ground level is intense and where moisture is reliably abundant in the canopy, the epiphytic lifestyle has evolved to extraordinary levels of diversity and specialization. The most visible epiphytes are the mosses and liverworts that coat every surface. These are the bryophytes, ancient plants that have no true roots, stems, or leaves as more advanced plants do, but instead consist of simple structures that absorb water and nutrients directly through their surfaces. In Monteverde, bryophytes grow with such abundance that they can add hundreds of pounds of weight to a single tree, creating a living sheath inches thick that completely obscures the bark beneath. Mosses are exquisitely adapted to the cloud forest. Their tiny leaves, often only a single cell layer thick in places, can absorb moisture directly from the air. Their rhizoids, root-like structures, serve mainly for attachment rather than for water absorption. They have no vascular tissue to transport water internally, relying instead on diffusion and capillary action, which works well when water is always available, but would fail immediately in drier conditions. The moss coating on a tree trunk is not a single species, but a community, perhaps dozens of species, each occupying slightly different positions based on their tolerance for light, moisture, and exposure. The side of the trunk that faces the prevailing wind and cloud direction might have different mosses than the sheltered side. The base of the trunk might support different species than the upper trunk. And the horizontal branches, where moisture accumulates differently than on vertical surfaces, host yet another moss assemblage. Living among the mosses are liverworts, even simpler plants that resemble miniature leaves lying flat against the bark. Some liverworts look like tiny green scales, others like ribbons, still others like miniature forests in themselves. They serve similar ecological roles to mosses, absorbing moisture, providing habitat for tiny invertebrates, contributing to the nutrient cycling of the canopy. But the epiphytes that capture human imagination most effectively are the orchids and bromeliads, larger, more conspicuous plants that produce spectacular flowers and create miniature ecosystems in the canopy. Monteverde hosts over 500 species of orchids, making it one of the most orchid-diverse places on Earth. They range from tiny species with flowers only a few millimeters across to large plants with flower spikes over a foot long. Some bloom for only a day, others maintain their flowers for weeks. Some release powerful fragrances, others are scentless. The diversity is overwhelming, almost incomprehensible. Orchid seeds are among the smallest in the plant kingdom, dust-like particles that can number over 1 million per seed capsule. They contain almost no stored nutrients, just the bare minimum of cells needed to constitute a living organism. Such tiny seeds can be dispersed over vast distances by wind, but they face a challenge: how to survive and grow without the nutritional reserves that larger seeds provide. The solution orchids have evolved is partnership with fungi. When an orchid seed lands on a suitable surface, a moss-covered branch in the cloud forest canopy, for instance, it must be colonized by the right species of fungus before it can germinate. The fungus penetrates the seed and establishes a relationship called mycorrhizae, where the fungus provides nutrients to the developing orchid seedling in exchange for sugars that the orchid will eventually produce through photosynthesis. Without the fungus, the seed cannot germinate. Without the orchid, the fungus has no access to photosynthetic sugars. Both depend absolutely on the other. Once established, orchids develop specialized structures for survival in the canopy. Many have thick, spongy roots that can absorb water directly from humid air. These roots are covered with a tissue called velamen, layers of dead cells that act like a sponge, soaking up moisture when it's available and holding it during brief dry periods. The roots often photosynthesize, containing chlorophyll and contributing to the plant's energy needs.
Some orchids have pseudobulbs, swollen stem structures that store water and nutrients, allowing the plant to survive periodic dry spells. Others have thick, fleshy leaves that serve similar storage functions. These adaptations allow orchids to persist in the canopy, where water availability, despite the general abundance of moisture, can vary depending on exact position and exposure. The flowers of cloud forest orchids are adaptations unto themselves, often exquisitely specialized for specific pollinators. Some produce fragrances that attract particular species of bees. Others have flower structures that can only be accessed by hummingbirds with bills of specific lengths. Still others employ deception, producing flowers that look or smell like female insects, luring male insects to attempt copulation and thereby effecting pollination without offering any actual reward. Bromeliads represent a different epiphytic strategy. These relatives of the pineapple form rosettes of stiff leaves that overlap at their bases, creating watertight cups or tanks. Rain, fog drip, and running water from above fill these tanks, creating miniature aquatic ecosystems suspended in the canopy. A large bromeliad might hold over a gallon of water, maintaining it even during dry periods. These bromeliad tanks become habitat for an extraordinary diversity of organisms. Mosquito larvae breed in them, frogs lay their eggs in them, and tadpoles develop in the tank water. Salamanders hunt insects around the leaves. Crabs somehow make their living in these aerial pools. The water itself contains detritus, dead insects, fallen leaves, animal feces that decomposes and provides nutrients that the bromeliad absorbs through specialized cells at the bases of its leaves. In effect, each bromeliad is a hanging pond, an aerial wetland, supporting a community of organisms that would normally be found only in ground-level aquatic habitats. Multiply this by the thousands of bromeliads in the forest, and the total volume of standing water suspended in the canopy is substantial, representing a significant component of the forest's water budget. Ferns, too, have colonized the canopy in spectacular fashion. Some species grow as epiphytes from the beginning, their spores settling on moss-covered branches and developing into the familiar fronds. Others start as terrestrial plants, but through the patient work of strangling figs or the accumulation of organic debris around their bases, find themselves gradually lifted into the canopy as the forest floor rises around them. Bird's nest ferns create exactly what their name suggests, large, circular arrangements of fronds that collect falling debris, building up considerable quantities of soil in their centers. This soil might be a foot deep, providing substrate for other plants to root in, creating a second-order epiphyte garden growing on the fern, growing on the tree. The weight of a large bird's nest fern with all its accumulated soil and secondary epiphytes can be hundreds of pounds, a substantial load for the branch supporting it. The three-dimensional structure created by epiphytes transforms the canopy into an almost unimaginably complex habitat. A single large canopy tree in Monteverde might support 2 or 3 tons of epiphytic plants, hundreds of individual organisms representing dozens of species. The branches become gardens, festooned with hanging plants, draped with moss, dotted with orchid flowers, holding bromeliads full of water.
This creates habitat and resources for animals that would not otherwise exist. Hummingbirds visit orchid flowers, feeding on nectar and effecting pollination. Insects breed in bromeliad tanks. Frogs hunt among the moss. Salamanders shelter under layers of epiphytic ferns. The canopy ceases to be merely the top of the forest and becomes instead a distinct habitat layer with its own resident community. The nutrients cycled through these epiphytic gardens never reach the ground. Decomposition occurs in the canopy, and the released nutrients are absorbed by the epiphytes themselves or by the host tree's canopy roots. In effect, the cloud forest has developed a secondary nutrient cycling pathway suspended in midair, operating independently of the soil-based cycling that occurs at ground level. This allows the forest to maintain higher productivity and support greater diversity than would be possible if all nutrients had to cycle through the ground. The moisture-holding capacity of epiphytic moss is particularly critical. During dry periods, when rainfall might be reduced, the moss releases stored moisture slowly, maintaining humidity in the canopy, continuing the drip to the forest floor. This buffering effect moderates the extremes, preventing the forest from drying out as much as it otherwise would. The moss, in effect, extends the moisture availability, smoothing out the fluctuations that might otherwise stress the ecosystem. But this aerial abundance is also fragile. The epiphytes depend absolutely on the constant moisture and stable temperatures of the cloud forest. They cannot survive drought, cannot tolerate temperature extremes, cannot persist if the clouds stop coming. Many species have no ability to disperse over long distances. Their seeds or spores can only travel short hops from parent plant to nearby branches. If their habitat is destroyed, they cannot colonize new areas. This makes the epiphytic community one of the most vulnerable components of the cloud forest ecosystem. Any change that reduces humidity, that raises temperatures, that disrupts the reliable delivery of cloud moisture, threatens not just the epiphytes themselves, but all the organisms that depend on them. The insects that breed in bromeliads, the frogs that lay their eggs in their tanks, the salamanders shelter in the moss. The canopy ceases to be merely the top of the forest and becomes instead a distinct habitat layer with its own resident community. The hanging gardens of Monteverde are not merely beautiful, not merely interesting curiosities of tropical biology. They are fundamental to how the ecosystem functions, to how it maintains its extraordinary diversity, to how it creates habitat and resources that allow so many species to coexist in such a small area. They are the green abundance made visible, the fertility of the cloud forest expressed in its most concentrated form. And they are home to some of the cloud forest's most spectacular inhabitants, including the bird whose emerald and crimson plumage rivals the orchids for brilliance, whose long tail feathers echo the hanging moss, whose presence in Monteverde has made this forest famous around the world. The resplendent Quetzal awaits in the canopy, a jewel among jewels, a living symbol of the cloud forest's magic and mystery. There are beautiful birds, and then there is the resplendent Quetzal. The adjective resplendent is not hyperbole, but simple description. This is a bird that seems to glow, that catches light and transforms it into color so intense it appears almost artificial, that combines form and hue in combinations that seem impossible until you see them with your own eyes. The male Quetzal in breeding plumage is approximately 14 inches long from beak to the base of the tail. But from that base extend two tail coverts, modified feathers that can grow over 2 feet in length, gracefully curved, iridescent, trailing behind the bird like ribbons of living light. These tail plumes alone make the Quetzal unmistakable, but they are only part of the magnificence.
The breast and belly are crimson, a deep blood red that provides shocking contrast to the green. Where these two colors meet, there is no gradation, no transition, just a sudden shift from one impossible color to another. The undertail coverts are white, visible when the bird flies, flashing against the general darkness of the forest. The beak is yellow, short and stout,
designed for gripping fruit rather than probing or tearing. The eyes are dark, large, and expressive, giving the bird an alert, intelligent look. The feet are small and weak, adapted for perching rather than walking or grasping. But these clinical descriptions fail to capture what it actually feels like to see a Quetzal. Words like green and red are inadequate, suggesting ordinary colors when what the bird displays is anything but ordinary. The green has depths and dimensions, shifts and subtleties that no photograph quite captures. The red is simultaneously warm and cool, rich and bright, deep yet luminous. And the tail feathers, those improbably long plumes, seem to float more than to hang, to drift with every movement like seaweed in a gentle current. Female Quetzals are more subdued, but still beautiful. They lack the long tail plumes and have more muted coloration, greener overall with less intense reds. But they still carry that iridescent quality, still catch light in that characteristic way, still possess the Quetzal's distinctive, elegant proportions and graceful bearing. The ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Aztec, and others, considered the Quetzal sacred. Quetzal feathers were reserved for royalty and high priests, used in headdresses and ceremonial costumes. The feathers were so valuable that capturing and killing a Quetzal was sometimes punishable by death. Instead, birds were captured, their longest tail feathers plucked, and the birds released to grow new ones, ensuring a sustainable supply of these precious plumes. The name Quetzal comes from the Aztec word Quetzali, meaning precious or beautiful. The feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, one of the most important deities in the Aztec pantheon, was depicted covered in Quetzal feathers. The association between the bird and divinity, between its beauty and spiritual power, ran deep in pre-Columbian cultures. Modern Guatemala has made the Quetzal its national bird, giving it pride of place on the flag and lending its name to the country's currency. But Guatemala's Quetzal populations have suffered from habitat loss and hunting, and the bird is now rare there. Costa Rica, particularly Monteverde, has become one of the most reliable places to see Quetzals in the wild, a fact that draws thousands of visitors annually. But the Quetzal is not merely a beautiful curiosity, not just a flagship species for ecotourism. It is a cloud forest specialist, adapted specifically to the conditions found in Monteverde and similar montane forests. Understanding the Quetzal means understanding how it fits into the ecosystem, how it makes its living, how it has evolved to exploit the specific resources that cloud forests provide. The Quetzal's diet consists primarily of fruit, particularly aguacatillos, small wild avocados in the family Lauraceae. These fruits are abundant in Monteverde's cloud forest, produced by several species of trees that fruit at different times throughout the year, ensuring a relatively constant food supply. The Quetzal plucks the fruit while hovering, unable to perch on the small branches where the fruits grow, then returns to a larger perch to consume it. The consumption method is distinctive. The bird manipulates the fruit in its beak, removes the soft pulp, and then regurgitates the large seed. This behavior makes Quetzals important seed dispersers for aguacatillo trees. The seeds they regurgitate, freed from their fleshy coating and deposited away from the parent tree, have higher germination rates than seeds that simply fall to the ground. The relationship is mutualistic. The trees provide food for the Quetzals, and the Quetzals ensure the tree's reproduction and dispersal. During the breeding season, Quetzals supplement their primarily frugivorous diet with insects, small frogs, and lizards, providing the protein needed for egg production and chick rearing. They hunt these prey items by flying from perch to perch through the canopy, making short sallies to grab visible prey. The Quetzal's habitat requirements are specific. They need primary cloud forest, undisturbed forest with large, old trees that provide nesting cavities, abundant aguacatillo trees for food, and the dense epiphytic growth that creates the complex canopy structure they prefer. They cannot survive in degraded forest, in plantations, or in secondary growth that lacks these critical components. Their territorial behavior further limits their distribution. Males establish territories during breeding season, defending areas that contain suitable nesting sites and adequate food resources. These territories are vigorously defended against other male quetzals, with aerial chases and vocal confrontations that can last for hours. A single pair of quetzals might require several hectares of prime cloud forest to successfully raise their young. The quetzal's voice is as distinctive as its appearance, a series of melodious whistles and calls that carry well through the misty forest. The most common call is a rising ki-oo or wee-oo, liquid and haunting, often the first sign that a quetzal is nearby. During breeding season, males call more frequently, advertising their territories and attracting females. Despite their spectacular appearance, quetzals can be surprisingly difficult to spot in the forest. When perched and quiet, their green backs blend remarkably well with the moss-covered branches and the general greenness of the canopy. Even the bright red breast can be hard to see in the dappled light and shadow. The long tail feathers, which seem like they would make the bird highly visible, often simply disappear into the visual confusion of hanging moss and epiphytic ferns. But when a quetzal moves, it becomes unmistakable. The flight is undulating, with deep wing beats alternating with glides, the long tail feathers flowing behind. In direct flight between trees, the white undertail coverts flash, visible for surprising distances through the forest. And when a quetzal lands and turns on its perch, the play of light on its iridescent feathers creates a shimmering effect that immediately draws the eye. Quetzals are most active in early morning and late afternoon, spending the middle of the day perched quietly, often in the same spots day after day. Birders seeking quetzals learn to stake out known perch trees, aguacatillo trees in fruit, or nest sites, waiting patiently for the birds to appear. The wait can be long, sometimes hours, but the reward, when it comes, makes every minute worthwhile. To see a male quetzal in full sunlight, perched where its plumage catches the light, the long tail feathers hanging elegantly, is to understand why ancient peoples considered it divine. No description prepares you for the reality, no photograph quite captures it. The bird must be seen in person, in its native habitat, surrounded by the cloud forest that created it and that it, in turn, helps to sustain. This is not a bird that belongs in a cage, could never thrive in captivity except in the most exceptional circumstances. The quetzal needs the freedom of the cloud forest, the space to fly its undulating path between trees, the aguacatillos to feed on, the cavities in old trees where it can nest. Take any of these away, and you have less than a quetzal, a shadow of what the bird should be. And so the quetzal has become a symbol not just of beauty, but of conservation, a reminder that some things cannot be possessed, can only be appreciated in their proper context, can only be preserved by preserving the ecosystems they depend on. To protect the quetzal, we must protect the cloud forest. To save the cloud forest, we save the quetzal and the hundreds of other species that share its home.
The Quetzal's life is intimately tied to the rhythms and resources of the cloud forest, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the bird's use of habitat across the elevational gradient of the mountains. Quetzals are altitudinal migrants, moving up and down the mountain slopes seasonally in response to the fruiting patterns of aguacatillo trees and other food sources. During the breeding season, roughly March through June, Quetzals concentrate at mid-elevations between about 4,000 and 7,000 feet, where suitable nesting sites are most abundant. They require large, old trees, particularly those in the family Lauraceae, with cavities or rotten sections that can be excavated to create nest chambers. The trees must be substantial, 30 or 40 feet tall at minimum, often much larger, and the cavities must be at specific heights, neither too low, vulnerable to ground predators, nor too high, difficult for the relatively weak flying Quetzals to access repeatedly. The male and female work together to excavate or modify the cavity, using their beaks to remove rotten wood and enlarge the chamber to suitable dimensions. The entrance hole is typically small, just large enough for the bird to enter, providing security against larger predators. Inside, the chamber is roughly 6 to 8 inches across, and perhaps twice that in depth, unlined except for a few wood chips from the excavation. The nest site often determines the male's territory. He will defend the area around a suitable cavity vigorously, ensuring that no rival males can usurp this critical resource. The territory must also include adequate food, fruiting aguacatillo trees within reasonable flying distance, because during incubation and chick rearing, the adults cannot afford to range far from the nest. Outside the breeding season, Quetzals become more nomadic, following fruit availability up and down the mountains. When aguacatillo trees at lower elevations fruit heavily, Quetzals descend to feed on them. When fruit becomes scarce at mid-elevations but abundant higher up, they ascend. This tracking of resources means that Quetzals might be common in a particular area for a few weeks and then largely absent for months, reappearing when conditions change. This altitudinal migration requires continuous forest cover across the elevational gradient. If the forest is fragmented, if there are gaps that Quetzals must cross, their ability to track resources is compromised. A Quetzal cannot migrate through cleared land, cannot nest in isolated forest patches. The entire mountainside must remain forested, connected, intact. The habitat quality matters as well. Quetzals strongly prefer primary forest that has never been logged, where large old trees remain standing, where the canopy structure is complex and multi-layered, where epiphytic growth is dense. They avoid or use only marginally secondary forest, areas that have regrown after clearing but lack the old trees and structural complexity of primary forest. This preference makes sense when you consider what Quetzals need. Nesting cavities occur primarily in old trees. Young trees rarely develop the size or the rotten heartwood necessary. Aguacatillo and other native fruit trees are more abundant in primary forest. The insects and small prey that supplement the Quetzal's diet are more diverse in undisturbed forest. And the dense epiphytic cover provides protection from predators and creates the humid microclimate that Quetzals evolved in. The relationship between Quetzals and aguacatillo trees deserves special attention, as it represents one of those elegant mutualisms that make tropical ecology so fascinating. Multiple species of trees in the laurel family produce fruits that we call aguacatillos, literally little avocados. These fruits are smaller than commercial avocados, but have a similar structure. A large seed surrounded by nutrient-rich, fatty pulp enclosed in a thin skin. Aguacatillos are too large for most birds to swallow whole, and the large seed relative to fruit size means that any bird eating them must deal with disposing of the seed. Quetzals have evolved the perfect solution. They swallow the fruit, digest the pulp during a very short gut passage time, often 30 minutes or less, and then regurgitate the cleaned seed.
This rapid processing allows quetzals to consume many fruits in sequence without having to wait for complete digestion. For the tree, this arrangement is ideal. The quetzal has removed the seed from beneath the parent tree, where germination success would be low due to seed predators and pathogenic fungi that concentrate near adult trees. The quetzal has cleaned the seed of its pulp, making it less attractive to seed predators, and the quetzal has deposited the seed in a new location, often tens or hundreds of meters from the parent, giving the seedling a chance to establish away from parental competition. In return for this service, the tree produces fruits specifically tailored to quetzal preferences. The fruit size is just right for a quetzal to grasp and manipulate. The pulp is rich in fats that provide the energy quetzals need. The fruiting timing often coincides with the quetzal's breeding season, when demand for high-energy food is greatest. Different aguacatillo species fruit at different times, creating a succession of food availability throughout the year. Some species fruit in the dry season, others in the wet season, still others during transitional periods. This staggered fruiting ensures that quetzals always have access to their preferred food, though the exact locations where food is available shift over time, driving the altitudinal migration pattern. Quetzals are not the only birds that eat aguacatillos. Trogons, bellbirds, and others also consume these fruits, but quetzals are among the most important dispersers due to their abundance during peak fruiting and their habit of carrying seeds far from parent trees before regurgitating them. The habitat requirements for successful quetzal reproduction extend beyond just food and nest sites. The birds also need particular humidity levels, particular temperature ranges, particular structural complexity in the forest. Eggs and chicks are vulnerable to temperature extremes. Too hot, and eggs can overheat, or chicks can suffer heat stress. Too cold, and development slows or stops. The cloud forest's stable temperatures, cool but not cold, consistent day and night, provide ideal conditions. The constant high humidity is also critical, particularly during incubation. Bird eggs lose water through their shells, and if humidity is too low, they can desiccate. The cloud forest's near-saturated air prevents this water loss, allowing eggs to maintain proper hydration throughout the incubation period. Predation pressure influences habitat selection as well. Quetzals nesting in areas with high populations of snakes, monkeys, or other potential predators may have lower nesting success. The dense epiphytic cover and the low visibility in the misty forest help protect nests by making them difficult for predators to find. A nest cavity entrance hidden behind hanging moss or ferns is much safer than one on a bare trunk visible from all angles. The quetzal's territorial behavior serves multiple functions. Obviously, it secures exclusive access to critical resources, nest sites, and food trees. But it also spaces out the population, preventing quetzals from concentrating so densely that they attract predator attention or deplete food resources. The territories are just large enough to support a breeding pair through the demanding season of egg-laying, incubation, and chick rearing, but not so large that they couldn't be defended against intruders. This territory size requirement, combined with the specific habitat needs, means that even extensive areas of cloud forest can only support limited numbers of quetzals. Monteverde, despite being one of the best quetzal habitats remaining, probably supports only a few hundred breeding pairs. The population appears stable for now, but it is vulnerable to any reduction in habitat quality or extent. Climate change poses a particular threat to quetzals because of their elevational migration behavior. If warming temperatures cause the cloud bays to rise up the mountainside, the mid-elevation forests where quetzals breed might become too dry. The aguacatillo trees might shift their fruiting patterns or their distributions. The delicate balance between temperature, humidity, and food availability that currently allows quetzals to thrive could be disrupted. For now, though, the system works. The clouds still bathe Monteverde in moisture. The aguacatillos still fruit in their seasonal progression. The old trees still provide nest cavities. And the quetzals still move through the forest, following their ancient patterns, playing their critical role in the ecosystem, offering those fortunate enough to see them a glimpse of beauty so profound it borders on the sacred.
The breeding season of the Resplendent Quetzal is a time of spectacle and intensity, when the normally solitary birds engage in displays and behaviors that rank among the most remarkable in the avian world. It begins in late February or early March as the dry season reaches its peak and the first hints of the coming wet season appear in changing weather patterns. The males, which have been growing their spectacular tail plumes throughout the preceding months, reach peak plumage condition. These extraordinary feathers, which can measure over 2 feet in length, are not true tail feathers, but modified upper tail coverts, feathers that grow from the base of the tail and extend far beyond it. They are among the longest feathers relative to body size of any bird in the world, an extravagant investment of resources and energy that can only be explained by sexual selection. The display begins with the call. From high in the canopy, a male quetzal announces his presence and his readiness to breed with a series of melodious whistles that carry through the misty forest. The call is distinctive, a rising "Q, Q, Q," or "cow, cow," liquid and pure, unlike any other sound in the cloud forest. In the quiet dawn hours, when the forest is still mostly asleep, these calls can be heard from several hundred meters away. A receptive female, hearing the call, approaches. What follows is one of nature's most elegant courtship rituals. The male positions himself on a high, exposed branch, allowing his tail plumes to hang freely. He then performs a series of flights, rising up from the perch and swooping down in long, undulating arcs, his tail feathers streaming behind him like ribbons in the wind. At the bottom of each swoop, he pulls up sharply and rises again, repeating the performance multiple times. The effect is mesmerizing. The long tail feathers catch the light with each movement, the iridescent green shifting to gold and back again. The white undertail coverts flash with each wing beat. The male's crimson breast blazes against the general green of the forest. And through it all, the male continues to call, filling the air with sound while his plumage fills the eyes with color. If the female is impressed, and given the energy expenditure required to grow those tail plumes and perform those displays, only the healthiest males can manage such performances, she will allow him to approach more closely. The pair will perch together, the male often offering the female choice pieces of fruit, a bonding behavior that reinforces the pair connection and provides the female with nutrients she will need for egg production. Once paired, the birds must find or create a suitable nest cavity. This is where the male's territorial behavior throughout the preceding weeks pays off. He has already identified suitable trees, often the same trees that have hosted quetzal nests in previous years. Certain individual trees seem particularly favored, used year after year by successive pairs of quetzals, the cavities maintained and modified by each generation. The excavation or modification of the cavity is shared labor, though males often do more of the work. Using their relatively weak beaks, they chip away at rotted wood, enlarging natural cavities or holes created by woodpeckers to dimensions suitable for quetzal use. The entrance hole is kept small, about 4 inches in diameter, just large enough for the bird to enter. This limits access to larger potential predators. The interior chamber is excavated to a depth of about 12 to 18 inches, with a width of about 6 to 8 inches at its widest point. The floor is left rough, with wood chips providing a rudimentary lining on which the eggs will be laid. Unlike many cavity nesting birds that bring in soft materials to line their nests, quetzals leave the cavity essentially bare, relying on the insulation provided by the tree itself and the constant warmth of incubation to maintain proper egg temperature. The female typically lays 2 eggs, though occasionally only 1 and very rarely 3. The eggs are pale blue, roughly the size of a small chicken egg, slightly elongated rather than spherical. They are laid a day or 2 apart, but incubation doesn't begin in earnest until both eggs are present, ensuring that the chicks will hatch at approximately the same time. Both parents incubate, sharing duties in a pattern that is unusual among birds. The male takes the night shift,
settling onto the eggs in late afternoon and remaining through the night until mid-morning the following day. The female then takes over, incubating through the heat of the day and into the afternoon until the male returns. This arrangement means each parent spends roughly 12 to 14 hours on the nest per day. The male's long tail plumes present a challenge during incubation. They cannot fit inside the cavity, so they protrude through the entrance hole, hanging down the trunk of the tree, sometimes nearly reaching the ground. This makes occupied nests relatively easy to identify for observers. A splash of iridescent green feathers hanging from a hole in a tree trunk is difficult to miss. It also potentially makes the nest more visible to predators, though the benefits of the tail plumes for attracting mates apparently outweigh this cost. Incubation lasts 17 to 18 days. During this period, the off-duty parent forages, maintaining its own body condition and sometimes bringing food to its incubating mate, though the incubating bird does leave the nest briefly to feed and defecate. The eggs must be maintained at nearly constant temperature, and the attentive incubation behavior of both parents ensures this. Hatching is not simultaneous, despite the eggs being laid close together. The first egg hatches a day or two before the second, giving the first chick a slight developmental advantage. The newly hatched chicks are helpless, naked, blind, and completely dependent on their parents for warmth and food. They are brooded almost constantly for the first few days, one parent sitting on them while the other forages. As the chicks grow and develop their feathering, they require less brooding and more food. Both parents work full-time to provision them, making constant trips to fruiting aguacatillo trees and hunting insects and other small prey. The diet for chicks is more protein-rich than the adult diet, with a higher proportion of insects, providing the nutrients needed for rapid growth. The feeding process is distinctive. The parent returns to the nest with food, clings to the entrance hole, and leans inside to feed the chicks by regurgitation. For fruit, the parent regurgitates the clean seed outside the nest, either dropping it or carrying it away from the immediate area before depositing it. This behavior prevents seed accumulation under the nest tree, which might attract seed predators that could also threaten the nestlings. The chicks grow rapidly, their feathers emerging and developing over the course of about 3 weeks. The long tail plumes of males do not develop until the second year, so juvenile males and females look similar, green above, less intensely colored than adults, with shorter tails. At about 3 weeks of age, the young are ready to fledge. They emerge from the cavity one at a time, usually on different days, each standing at the entrance hole for minutes or even hours, working up the courage to make that first leap into the air. The parents call encouragingly, sometimes landing on nearby branches with food, enticing the youngsters to fly to them. That first flight is a critical moment. The young bird has never flown before, has never tested its wings except by flapping inside the confines of the cavity. It must now launch itself into three-dimensional space, navigate between trees, land on a branch. Most manage this successfully, though landings can be clumsy, and occasionally a young bird ends up on the ground, vulnerable until it can climb or flutter its way back up into the trees. Once fledged, the young remain dependent on their parents for another 3 to 4 weeks, following them through the forest, begging for food, learning where the good fruiting trees are, how to catch insects, how to navigate the complex three-dimensional space of the canopy. They are conspicuous in their begging, calling persistently, sometimes more visible and audible than the adults. Gradually, they become more independent, starting to find food on their own, ranging farther from the parents. By about 6 to 8 weeks post-fledging, they are fully independent, capable of sustaining themselves without parental help. At this point, the family group dissolves, the young dispersing to find their own territories or joining loose flocks of other juveniles and non-breeding adults. The parents, if their first nesting attempt was successful and occurred early in the season, may attempt a second brood, finding or excavating a new cavity and repeating the entire process. More commonly, pairs produce only one brood per year, investing heavily in those 2 chicks rather than attempting multiple broods with potentially lower success rates per attempt.
Nest predation is a significant source of mortality.
Snakes, particularly tree-dwelling species, can access nest cavities and consume eggs or nestlings. Toucans and other large-billed birds occasionally break into nests. Monkeys might investigate cavities they encounter, though whether they actually predate Quetzal nests is unclear. The parent's vigilance and the small entrance hole provide some protection, but no nest is entirely safe. Weather can also impact nesting success. Unusually cold periods might stress incubating adults or slow embryo development. Heavy rains, though rare during the primary breeding season, might flood nests or make foraging difficult. Any disruption to the food supply, a poor fruiting year for aguacatillos, for instance, can result in adults abandoning nesting attempts or failing to adequately provision chicks. Despite these challenges, Quetzal reproductive success in Monteverde appears relatively good, with many pairs successfully fledging at least one chick per year. The population seems stable, neither increasing dramatically nor declining precipitously. This suggests that the habitat quality remains adequate, that food resources remain sufficient, that predation pressure is not overwhelming. But the breeding biology of Quetzals, the specific habitat requirements, the dependence on particular food resources, the need for old trees with cavities, makes them vulnerable to habitat degradation. Even small changes could tip the balance, making the difference between a stable population and a declining one. The courtship displays, the patient incubation, the devoted parental care, the spectacular plumage, all of these represent investments, strategies for ensuring that genes pass to the next generation. They're the products of millions of years of evolution, refined by natural and sexual selection to fit the particular circumstances of the cloud forest. They work beautifully, elegantly, but they work only here, only in this specific habitat, only under these particular conditions. To see a male Quetzal performing his courtship flight, tail feathers streaming behind him as he swoops through the misty forest, is to witness evolution's artistry, to see the exquisite matching of form to function, beauty to purpose, and to know that this display depends absolutely on the continued existence of healthy cloud forest, on the aguacatillo trees and the old snags and the constant moisture, is to understand why conservation matters, why protecting these forests is not just about preserving scenery, but about maintaining the living processes that have created wonders like the Quetzal. The Quetzal may be the most famous bird of the Monteverde Cloud Forest, but it is far from the only one. The forest hosts over 400 bird species, an astonishing diversity for such a small geographic area. Among these are the hummingbirds, those aerial jewels that bring motion and iridescence to the cloud forest in concentrated, hypermetabolic packages. More than 30 species of hummingbirds occur in and around Monteverde, ranging from tiny species weighing less than 3 grams to relatively large species of 10 or 12 grams. Each has carved out its own niche, specializing on particular flowers, particular elevations, particular microhabitats within the cloud forest's complex structure. The violet saberwing is among the largest, a robust hummingbird with deep purple plumage in males and females in green. They are aggressive defenders of nectar resources, capable of driving away much smaller hummingbirds and even birds of other families. Their size allows them to access flowers that smaller hummingbirds cannot, particularly large heliconia and banana family flowers with deep corolla tubes. At the opposite extreme is the scintillant hummingbird, barely 3 inches long, one of the smallest birds in the world. The males have gorgeous orange-red throats that flash like flames when caught in direct light. They favor smaller flowers, particularly those of epiphytic plants in the canopy, where their tiny size and maneuverability allow them to hover and feed in tight spaces between branches. The green-crowned brilliant is another common species, the males sporting purple throats and vivid green crowns. They are frequently seen at forest edges and in gaps where flowering is prolific. The females of this species build tiny cup nests on horizontal branches, constructing them from moss and spider silk, decorating the outside with lichens that provide camouflage against the moss-covered branch. Perhaps the most spectacular is the fiery-throated hummingbird, found primarily at the highest elevations of the cloud forest. The male's throats are not just one color, but a shifting iridescence of orange, red, purple, and blue depending on the angle of light. Add to this a blue crown, green back, and copper rump, and you have a bird that rivals the Quetzal for sheer color intensity. Hummingbirds are ecological wonders, adapted for a lifestyle that pushes the limits of what is physiologically possible for a warm-blooded vertebrate. Their hearts beat over 1,000 times per minute during flight. Their wings beat 50 to 80 times per second, creating the characteristic hum that give them their English name. Their metabolism is so high that they must feed almost constantly during daylight hours, visiting hundreds or even thousands of flowers per day to meet their energy needs. At night, when they cannot feed, hummingbirds enter a state called torpor, dramatically lowering their body temperature and metabolic rate to conserve energy. Body temperature might drop from 104 degrees Fahrenheit during the day to 70 or even 60 degrees at night, a reduction that would be fatal for most birds, but that allows hummingbirds to survive the hours of fasting darkness imposes. The feeding adaptations of hummingbirds are exquisite. The bill shape varies among species, matching the flower types each specializes on. Long, curved bills reach into deep, curved flowers. Short, straight bills access more open flowers. The tongue is not a simple tube, but a complex structure with a grooved tip that uses capillary action to draw up nectar. The tongue can extend well beyond the bill tip, probing deep into flower bases. The flight capabilities are equally remarkable. Hummingbirds can hover in place, fly backward, fly upside down briefly, and execute aerial maneuvers that no other bird can match. This allows them to feed from flowers while hovering, without needing to perch. It also makes them formidable in aerial combat. Hummingbird territorial disputes often involve spectacular chase sequences through dense vegetation, with rapid changes in direction that would be impossible for larger, less maneuverable birds. The relationship between hummingbirds and flowers is one of the most studied examples of coevolution. Many cloud forest flowers are specifically adapted for hummingbird pollination. They produce copious, dilute nectar, matching hummingbird preferences. They often have red, orange, or pink coloration, colors that hummingbirds see well but that many insects do not. They have tubular shapes that exclude most insects but welcome hummingbird bills, and they lack strong scents since hummingbirds have poor senses of smell. In return for nectar, hummingbirds transfer pollen. As the bird hovers and feeds, its forehead or throat often contacts the flower's stamens, picking up pollen. When it visits the next flower of the same species, that pollen may contact the stigma, affecting fertilization. The system works because hummingbirds tend to be faithful to particular flower types as long as they're productive, visiting the same species repeatedly in a circuit, ensuring that pollen moves between individuals of the same plant species rather than being wasted on incompatible species. Different hummingbird species specialize on different flower types, reducing competition. Some prefer epiphytic flowers in the canopy, others favor understory shrubs. Some feed primarily on heliconia and banana family flowers, others on ericaceae family plants. This partitioning of resources allows multiple hummingbird species to coexist in the same forest without competing directly. The epiphytic bromeliads and certain orchids that festoon the cloud forest canopy are important hummingbird resources. They bloom throughout the year in different species, providing continuous nectar availability even when other food sources are scarce. Some bromeliads have evolved inflorescences specifically shaped for hummingbird access, with flowers arranged along spikes that allow the birds to move systematically from bloom to bloom.
Hummingbirds also consume insects and spiders, capturing them in flight or gleaning them from foliage. This protein supplement is particularly important during breeding season when females need protein for egg production and when chicks require protein-rich food for growth. Some species do most of their insect hunting in the hour or two before dusk, taking advantage of the aerial insect activity that peaks at that time. The breeding behavior of cloud forest hummingbirds varies by species. Most are promiscuous, with males and females coming together only briefly for mating. Males establish display territories, often at traditional lek sites, where multiple males gather to perform for visiting females. These displays might involve aerial loops, hovering with throat feathers flared to maximum iridescence, or singing, though hummingbirds' songs are more often thin, high-pitched squeaks than melodious performances. Females build nests and raise young alone without male assistance. The nests are tiny cups, often only an inch or two across, built on horizontal branches or tucked into forks. They're constructed from moss, plant fibers, and spider silk, which provides both binding and elasticity, allowing the nest to stretch as the growing chicks fill it. The outside is often decorated with lichens that provide camouflage. 2 eggs are typical, each about the size of a coffee bean, white and unmarked. Incubation lasts 14 to 19 days depending on species and ambient temperature. The chicks are among the smallest of all baby birds, naked and helpless at hatching, requiring constant brooding for the first week. They grow rapidly on a diet of regurgitated nectar and insects, fledging in 18 to 25 days. Young hummingbirds must learn to feed and navigate the 3-dimensional space of the cloud forest, skills that are not entirely instinctive. Newly fledged birds can be clumsy, misjudging distances, missing flowers, struggling with hovering. Within days, though, they gain proficiency, their remarkable flight capabilities refined by practice. The diversity of hummingbirds in Monteverde creates a constant buzz of activity. At any moment, at any flowering patch, multiple species might be present, feeding, competing, chasing each other, establishing temporary dominance hierarchies based on size and aggressiveness. The violet saberwings typically dominate, their size and pugility giving them priority access. Smaller species sneak in between saberwing visits or find alternate flowers that the larger birds ignore. Some plant species have evolved specifically to exclude large hummingbirds, producing flowers with such long, narrow corolla tubes that only small-billed species can access the nectar at the base. This protects the nectar from being monopolized by aggressive larger species and ensures that the smaller specialist pollinators visit regularly. The hummingbird community changes somewhat with elevation within the cloud forest. Some species are restricted to the highest elevations, like the fiery-throated hummingbird and volcano hummingbird. Others occur primarily at mid-elevations. A few range from lowlands well up into cloud forest. This elevational stratification further reduces competition and increases overall hummingbird diversity. Seasonal movements also occur. Some species migrate altitudinally, moving downslope during cold periods or when particular flowers are blooming at lower elevations. Others are year-round residents, defending territories throughout the year, exploiting the sequence of flowering that ensures some nectar is always available. The hummingbirds of Monteverde are more than just beautiful additions to the bird list. They are critical pollinators, ensuring reproduction of dozens of plant species. They are indicators of ecosystem health, their presence requiring the continuous nectar availability that only intact forest with diverse flowering plants can provide. And they are embodiments of evolutionary refinement, their impossible aerial abilities and jewel-like plumage representing millions of years of selection for nectar-feeding efficiency and mate attraction. To stand in a flowering clearing in the cloud forest, surrounded by the hum of multiple hummingbird species, watching them dart and hover and flash their iridescent colors, is to experience biodiversity at its most concentrated and spectacular. Each species is a marvel, perfectly adapted to its particular niche, and together they demonstrate the principle that the greatest diversity arises when resources are partitioned finely, when specialization allows multiple species to coexist by reducing direct competition.
The quetzal may draw visitors to Monteverde, but it is often the hummingbirds, more numerous, more visible, more constantly active, that provide the most frequent encounters with cloud forest wildlife. Their beauty may be miniature compared to the quetzals, but it is no less intense, no less the product of evolution's patient artistry. Beyond the birds, Monteverde's cloud forest supports a remarkable diversity of mammals, from the largest land animals in Central America to tiny mice that weigh only a few grams. These mammals are often elusive, many being nocturnal or crepuscular, but their presence is written into the forest in tracks, scat, browse marks, and the occasional fortunate encounter. The Baird's tapir is the largest mammal in the cloud forest, a prehistoric-looking creature that can weigh over 600 pounds. Tapirs are related to horses and rhinoceroses, though they look more like a cross between a pig and an elephant, with a stocky body, short trunk-like snout, and surprisingly delicate feet. They are browsers, feeding on leaves, fruits, and tender shoots, moving through the forest on well-worn trails that they've used for generations. Tapirs are shy and primarily nocturnal, making sightings rare despite their size. They require large territories, many square miles per individual, and undisturbed forest with access to water. A wallowing pool is essential, as tapirs spend considerable time in water, both for cooling and for ridding themselves of parasites. The mineral-rich mud at forest wallows provides nutrients, and the thick coating protects their skin. In Monteverde, tapir populations are low but apparently stable. Their tracks, three-toed prints the size of a dinner plate, occasionally appear on muddy trails. Their distinctive droppings, often deposited in water or at traditional latrine sites, provide evidence of their passing. And very rarely a lucky hiker encounters one, usually at dawn or dusk, the massive animal freezing momentarily before crashing away through the undergrowth with surprising speed for its bulk. Wild cats inhabit the cloud forest, though like tapirs, they are rarely seen. The jaguar, largest of the New World cats, once ranged throughout Monteverde, but is now rare or possibly absent, its populations fragmented by habitat loss. Pumas, more adaptable and wide-ranging, still patrol the forest, hunting deer, pacas, and other prey. Their tracks occasionally appear on trails, and their screams, an unearthly sound somewhere between a scream and a roar, very rarely echo through the night forest. More common are the smaller cats. Ocelots, beautifully marked with rosettes and stripes, hunt rodents and other small prey. Margays, smaller still and highly arboreal, spend most of their lives in the canopy, using their specialized ankle joints that can rotate 180 degrees to climb down trees head first. And jaguarundis, odd-looking cats with elongated bodies and short legs, prowl in search of birds, reptiles, and small mammals. All of these cats are solitary and territorial with large home ranges. They are crepuscular or nocturnal, avoiding the activity periods of their prey and of humans. Seeing one requires tremendous luck or dedicated effort with camera traps. But knowing they're there, knowing that these apex predators still move through Monteverde's forest is important. It indicates that the ecosystem remains intact enough with sufficient prey populations and undisturbed habitat to support animals at the top of the food web. The three-wattled bellbird might be classified as a bird in ornithological terms, but its call is so loud, so distinctive, and so omnipresent during breeding season that it demands mention among the mammals. The male's call, a metallic bonk that can be heard for a mile, rings through the forest repeatedly. The bird itself is remarkable, the male's white with three worm-like wattles dangling from the beak base, giving them a bizarre appearance. They're frugivorists like quetzals, feeding primarily on aguacatillos and other fruits, and they're similarly important seed dispersers.
Howler monkeys, though uncommon in the highest elevations of cloud forest, are present in the slightly lower zones where Monteverde transitions toward pre-montane conditions. Their roaring calls, produced by specialized hyoid bones that amplify sound, carry for miles through the forest. They're folivores primarily, feeding on leaves, flowers, and fruits, moving through the canopy in small troops, occasionally engaging in calling contests with neighboring troops that establish territorial boundaries without physical confrontation. White-faced capuchin monkeys also occur in lower cloud forest, more omnivorous than howlers, feeding on fruits, insects, small vertebrates, and even raiding birds' nests. They're intelligent and adaptable, capable of using tools and solving complex problems. Their social structure is complex, with coalitions and hierarchies that can shift over time. Smaller mammals abound, though most are nocturnal and rarely seen. Kinkajous, related to raccoons but living entirely in trees, emerge at night to feed on fruits and nectar. Their prehensile tails and flexible ankles allow them to navigate the canopy with ease. They're important pollinators of certain flowers that bloom at night, their faces becoming dusted with pollen as they reach into flowers for nectar. Olingos, similar to kinkajous but smaller and without prehensile tails, also inhabit the canopy. Coatis, more terrestrial members of the raccoon family, travel in bands through the forest, turning over leaves and logs in search of invertebrates. Their long, flexible snouts probe into crevices, and their ringed tails, held upright as they travel, create a distinctive bobbing procession through the undergrowth. Pacas, large rodents with spotted coats, are nocturnal and solitary, feeding on fallen fruits and seeds. Agoutis, smaller relatives of pacas, are diurnal, nervously foraging in the leaf litter, always alert for predators. Both play important roles as seed dispersers and seed predators, influencing which tree species successfully reproduce. Porcupines in the cloud forest are tree dwellers, moving slowly through the canopy, feeding on bark and leaves. Their quills provide protection from most predators, though fisher cats, not present in Monteverde, and some large raptors can successfully hunt them. Sloths, both two-toed and three-toed species, hang in the canopy, their slow-motion lifestyle so efficient that they need to descend to the ground only once a week to defecate. The sloth's arboreal life has allowed the evolution of a unique ecosystem within its fur. Algae grow in the grooves of sloth hairs, giving some individuals a greenish tint that provides camouflage. Moths live in the fur, and beetles and other arthropods make their homes there. The sloth is not just an animal, but a mobile habitat, supporting its own specialized community of organisms. Bats are perhaps the most diverse mammal group in Monteverde, with dozens of species occupying different feeding niches. Insectivorous bats hawk flying insects or glean them from foliage. Frugivorous bats feed on figs and other fruits, serving as important seed dispersers. Nectar-feeding bats pollinate certain flowers that bloom at night. Carnivorous bats hunt small vertebrates. And yes, there are vampire bats, though they feed primarily on livestock and large wild mammals rather than on humans. The diversity of bats reflects the diversity of the cloud forest itself. Different species specialize on different foods, different foraging strategies, different roosting sites. Some roost in caves, others in tree hollows, still others create tent-like shelters by biting the mid-ribs of large leaves to make them fold. Each species has echolocation calls tuned to its particular hunting style and habitat, creating an ultrasonic symphony that occurs above the range of human hearing, but that fills the night forest with sound. Smaller rodents, mice, rats, native species, not the introduced pests, and spiny pocket mice scurry through the leaf litter and climb in the understory. Shrews, though not actually rodents, fill similar niches, hunting insects and other invertebrates with manic intensity, their metabolism so high that they must eat nearly their own weight in food each day.
These small mammals form the prey base for the predators mentioned earlier, the cats, the owls, the snakes. Their populations fluctuate with food availability, with rainfall patterns, with predation pressure. In good years, when fruit and seeds are abundant, their numbers increase. In poor years, they decline. These fluctuations ripple through the ecosystem, affecting predator populations, seed dispersal patterns, even vegetation composition, as changed herbivore pressure alters which plant species can successfully establish. The mammal community of Monteverde, like everything in the cloud forest, is intricately connected to the habitat structure and the moisture regime. The epiphytic gardens provide food and shelter, the fruiting trees offer sustenance, the complex three-dimensional structure creates numerous niches, and the constant moisture supports the plant productivity that underlies all of this animal diversity. Mammals are generally less visible than birds, but their influence on the cloud forest ecosystem is profound. They disperse seeds, often carrying them farther than birds can. They predate seeds, creating selection pressure that shapes plant strategies. They pollinate flowers, transfer nutrients between soil and canopy, create gaps through their browsing, and serve as prey for top predators. To walk the cloud forest trails without seeing a mammal is common, but to know they're there, the tapirs on their ancient paths, the cats on their solitary hunts, the bats filling the night sky, the monkeys calling from the canopy, is to understand that the forest is not a static museum, but a living, dynamic system, full of creatures pursuing their survival, their reproduction, their evolutionary destinies in this remarkable ecosystem. Water in the cloud forest exists in forms beyond just rain. It saturates the air as humidity, condenses on every surface as mist, drips constantly from leaves and moss, flows in crystalline streams and cascades down slopes in waterfalls that seem to materialize from the mist itself. The amphibians of Monteverde have evolved to exploit this abundance of moisture, creating one of the most diverse amphibian communities on Earth. Over 160 species of amphibians inhabit the Monteverde region, an astonishing number for such a small area. They range from tiny frogs barely larger than a thumbnail to robust toads weighing over a pound. They occupy every habitat, from the forest floor to the highest reaches of the canopy, from rushing streams to bromeliad tanks, from temporary puddles to permanent pools. The glass frogs are among the most remarkable. These small frogs, typically green with translucent skin on their undersides, allow you to see their internal organs, heart, liver, eggs, through their belly skin. They live along streams in the forest, the males calling from vegetation overhanging the water. When females arrive, they lay their eggs on leaves above the stream. The male guards these eggs, keeping them moist with water he collects on his skin from the stream below. When the tadpoles hatch, they drop from the leaf into the stream below, where they complete their development. This unusual reproductive strategy, eggs out of water but tadpoles in water, protects the eggs from aquatic predators while ensuring the tadpoles have access to the stream habitat they need. The transparent belly might serve as camouflage, making the frog harder to spot when viewed from below against a background of leaves and sky. Red-eyed tree frogs, though more commonly associated with lowland rainforests, do occur in the lower reaches of Monteverde's cloud forest. Their spectacular coloration, bright green bodies, blue and yellow sides, orange feet, and those enormous red eyes makes them favorites of photographers and frog enthusiasts. They too breed in unusual ways, laying eggs on leaves above water, the tadpoles dropping into ponds below upon hatching. The leaf litter of the forest floor hosts numerous species of small frogs that never enter water as adults. These terrestrial breeders have evolved direct development. The eggs hatch not into tadpoles, but into miniature frogs, skipping the aquatic larval stage entirely. This allows them to breed far from water, anywhere the forest floor provides sufficient moisture and protection. Some species carry this further, with parental care behaviors rarely seen in amphibians. Poison dart frogs, though more commonly associated with lowland rainforests, do occur here. Their brilliant green and black frogs lay their eggs in moist leaf litter. When the tadpoles hatch, a parent, usually the male, allows them to climb onto his back, then carries them to water, often depositing individual tadpoles in separate bromeliad tanks, where they'll complete development without competing with siblings. The bromeliad tanks scattered throughout the cloud forest canopy serve as aquatic habitats for numerous frog species. The water in these tanks, though limited in volume, is relatively stable and predator-free compared to ground-level pools. Frogs that breed in bromeliads have evolved to exploit this resource, laying eggs in the tanks, their tadpoles developing in the nutrient-rich water fed by decomposing insects and organic debris. Some tadpoles in these tanks are cannibalistic, the largest individuals eating smaller tadpoles or eggs. This might seem cruel, but it's a viable strategy when food is limited, and when successful development of even one offspring is better than the starvation of all. The female frogs sometimes provision the tadpoles, returning to deposit unfertilized eggs that the tadpoles consume, providing protein they need to complete development. Salamanders, the cloud forest's other major amphibian group, are less diverse than frogs, but no less remarkable. They are entirely absent from lowland tropical forests, requiring the cooler temperatures of montane regions. Monteverde hosts several species, all lungless. They breathe entirely through their moist skin, requiring the constant high humidity that the cloud forest provides. These salamanders are cryptic, living in moss, under logs, in bromeliad leaf bases, emerging primarily at night to hunt tiny invertebrates. Some species are tiny, barely 2 inches long, others reach 6 or even 8 inches. Most are dark brown or gray, providing camouflage against bark and soil, though some have bright orange or red markings that might warn predators of distasteful skin secretions. The reproductive strategies of cloud forest salamanders are diverse. Some lay eggs in moist moss or under logs, the female guarding them until they hatch directly into miniature salamanders, skipping the aquatic larval stage entirely. Others lay eggs near streams, the larvae developing in the water before metamorphosizing into terrestrial adults. Still others are viviparous, giving birth to live young, an unusual strategy for amphibians, but advantageous in environments where suitable water for larval development might be scarce. But perhaps the most famous amphibian of Monteverde, though tragically no longer present, was the golden toad. This spectacular species, the male's brilliant orange, the female's olive green with scarlet spots, was endemic to a tiny area of cloud forest near Monteverde. They spent most of their lives underground, emerging only during a brief breeding season when temporary pools formed from heavy rains. The breeding congregations were spectacular, with dozens or even hundreds of males gathering at pools, their golden bodies crowding together in what observers described as almost unbelievable color displays. The females arrived later, outnumbered by males, resulting in intense competition as multiple males attempted to mate with each female. The golden toad was discovered by science only in 1966. By 1987, the population had crashed, with only 10 or 11 individuals found. In 1988 and 1989, only single individuals were spotted. After May 1989, despite extensive searches, no golden toads have been seen. The species is presumed extinct. The cause of this extinction remains somewhat uncertain, but climate change appears to have played a role. The years leading up to the crash were unusually warm and dry, reducing the formation of the temporary pools the toads needed for breeding. This stress might have made them more vulnerable to chytridiomycosis, a fungal disease that has devastated amphibian populations worldwide. The Chytridia fungus thrives in cool, wet conditions, exactly the conditions of cloud forests. It infects the skin of amphibians, disrupting their ability to regulate water and electrolytes, eventually causing cardiac arrest. The fungus has spread globally, possibly aided by human activities, and has driven numerous amphibian species to extinction or near extinction. Monteverde has lost not just the golden toad, but the harlequin frogs that once lived along its streams. These brilliantly colored frogs, members of the genus Atelopus, were common throughout Central American cloud forests. Now they are gone from Monteverde and severely reduced elsewhere, victims of chytridiomycosis combined with habitat loss and climate change. The loss of these species is not just an aesthetic tragedy, though the world is certainly poorer for the absence of the golden toad's spectacular color. It represents a functional loss as well. Amphibians play crucial roles in cloud forest ecosystems. As tadpoles, they graze algae and consume organic matter in streams, influencing nutrient cycling and water quality. As adults, they consume vast quantities of insects and other invertebrates, controlling pest populations and transferring nutrients between aquatic and terrestrial systems. Many amphibians are also important prey for other species. Snakes, birds, mammals, even large invertebrates prey on frogs and salamanders. The loss of amphibian biomass from an ecosystem cascades through the food web, affecting predators and potentially releasing prey insects from population control. The remaining amphibian community in Monteverde appears relatively healthy for now, but vigilance is necessary. Monitoring programs track populations, watching for declines that might indicate disease outbreaks or environmental changes. Research continues on the Chytridia fungus, seeking to understand how some populations resist it while others succumb, hoping to find management strategies that might protect vulnerable species. Some amphibians have shown surprising resilience. After initial population crashes from chytridiomycosis, certain species have begun to recover, suggesting they may be evolving resistance to the fungus, or that environmental conditions have shifted in ways that favor the amphibians over the pathogen. These recoveries offer hope that not all is lost, that adaptation and resilience remain possible even in the face of novel threats. The cloud forest's perpetual moisture, its temperature stability, its complex structure with niches ranging from canopy tanks to forest floor leaf litter, all of these create conditions ideal for amphibian diversity. Monteverde should be an amphibian paradise, and in many ways it still is. But the golden toad's extinction serves as a warning that even in paradise, even in protected reserves, species can vanish, ecosystems can be disrupted, and changes beyond our control can alter systems we thought secure. The frogs still call from the streams at night, their voices creating a chorus that changes with the seasons and with the rains. Glass frogs still guard their eggs on leaves above the water. Salamanders still hunt through the moss in the dark hours. But the golden toad is gone, and with it a reminder of how fragile these systems are, how vulnerable to changes in climate and to diseases that may be exacerbated by those changes. To walk the cloud forest trails knowing that the golden toad once lived here, once painted these forests with improbable color, once demonstrated that evolution can create wonders even in the smallest, most restricted ranges, is to carry both wonder and sorrow. Wonder at what the cloud forest still contains, sorrow at what has been lost, and determination, perhaps, to protect what remains, to ensure that the remaining species do not follow the golden toad into extinction.
The insect diversity of Monteverde is almost beyond comprehension. Entomologists estimate that tens of thousands of insect species inhabit the cloud forest, many still undescribed by science, many known from only a few specimens. They fill every imaginable niche, exploit every resource, demonstrate evolutionary adaptations that range from elegantly simple to bewilderingly complex. The leafcutter ants are perhaps the most visible insects, their highways cutting across trails, their workers marching in endless columns carrying pieces of leaves several times their own size. But these ants don't eat the leaves. Instead, they carry them underground to vast fungus gardens, where the leaf material serves as substrate for growing a specialized fungus that the ants do eat. The colonies can be enormous, containing millions of individuals occupying underground chambers that extend deep into the soil. The division of labor is sophisticated, with different worker castes performing different tasks. The smallest workers tend the fungus gardens, maintaining optimal conditions and weeding out competing fungi. Medium workers harvest leaves, cutting and carrying them to the nest. The largest workers, soldiers with massive mandibles, defend the colony from predators and parasites. This ant-fungus mutualism has existed for millions of years, the ants and fungus co-evolving, becoming so interdependent that neither can survive without the other. The fungus species the ants cultivate is found nowhere in nature except in leafcutter ant colonies. The ants have become obligate farmers, their entire society organized around the cultivation of their crop. Butterflies fill the cloud forest with color and motion. The morphos, with their iridescent blue wings that flash as they fly, are among the most spectacular. The blue is structural color, created by microscopic scales that interfere with light waves, producing the brilliant hue. The undersides of the wings are cryptically colored in browns and blacks, allowing the butterfly to disappear when it lands and closes its wings. The owl butterflies, among the largest in Monteverde, have prominent eye spots on their underwings that may startle predators or deflect attacks away from vital body parts. They fly primarily at dawn and dusk, their large wings allowing them to glide silently through the forest like moths. The glasswing butterflies have transparent wings with minimal scales, making them nearly invisible in flight, a different approach to predator avoidance. The caterpillars of cloud forest butterflies feed on specific host plants, often with remarkable specificity. Some species can develop only on a single plant species or genus. This specialization creates vulnerability. If the host plant declines or disappears, the butterfly dependent on it must also decline. But it also allows the caterpillar to evolve specific adaptations for dealing with that plant's chemical defenses. Many cloud forest plants produce toxic or distasteful compounds to discourage herbivores. Some caterpillars have evolved to tolerate these compounds, even to sequester them in their own bodies, becoming toxic themselves and gaining protection from predators. The bright warning colors of many caterpillars advertise this toxicity, telling potential predators that eating them would be a mistake. Moths, the butterfly's nocturnal relatives, are far more diverse, with thousands of species in Monteverde. They range from tiny species with wingspans of only a few millimeters to hawk moths with wingspans of 5 or 6 inches. The hawk moths are important pollinators of night-blooming flowers, hovering like hummingbirds as they probe deep flowers with their long tongues. Beetles rival or exceed moths in diversity. They fill every imaginable niche: predators, herbivores, fungivores, detritivores, parasites. The Hercules beetle, one of the largest insects in the world, occurs in the cloud forest, though it's uncommon. Males can reach 6 inches in length, much of this consisting of enormous horns used in combat with other males. Stag beetles, similarly equipped with massive mandibles, also occur here. Weevils, with their characteristic long snouts, specialize on particular plants. Leaf beetles come in dazzling colors and patterns. Ground beetles hunt in the litter leaf. Rove beetles, with their short wing covers and mobile abdomens, patrol bark and moss looking for small prey. The walking sticks and leaf insects demonstrate camouflage taken to extremes. Walking sticks resemble twigs so perfectly that finding them requires close inspection. They remain motionless during the day, becoming active at night to feed on leaves. Leaf insects look exactly like leaves, complete with vein patterns and irregular edges that mimic insect damage. When they walk, they sway side to side, mimicking leaves moving in wind.
Katydids, relatives of grasshoppers, achieve similar camouflage. Some species look like green leaves, others like dead brown leaves, still others like bark or lichen. The males produce calls by rubbing their wings together, creating sounds that range from soft ticks to loud buzzes, depending on species. Each species has its own characteristic call, allowing females to locate males of their own kind. The mantids are ambush predators, sitting motionless on vegetation, waiting for prey to come within striking distance. When it does, the mantis's spiny forelegs snap out with blinding speed, grasping the victim and holding it while the mantis's powerful jaws consume it. Some cloud forest mantis species are camouflaged to look like flowers, attracting insect prey that mistake them for nectar sources. Social wasps build elaborate paper nests in the understory and canopy, the workers foraging for caterpillars and other soft-bodied insects to feed their larvae. The adults feed on nectar and sweet secretions, but the larvae are carnivorous, creating demand for protein that the workers fulfill. The nests are defended aggressively, the wasps capable of delivering painful stings to intruders. The army ants, though less visible than leafcutters because they don't create permanent trails, are equally fascinating. They nest temporarily in hollow logs or tree cavities, swarming out in massive raids that sweep across the forest floor, capturing any small animals they encounter. Birds follow these raids, catching insects that flee the advancing ants, creating multi-species feeding flocks that include dozens of bird species. The fig wasps represent one of nature's most intricate mutualisms. Each fig species has its own specific wasp that pollinates it. The female wasp enters the fig through a small opening, loses her wings in the process, lays her eggs in some of the fig's flowers, pollinates others, and dies inside the fig. Her offspring develop, mate inside the fig, and the new generation of females, carrying pollen from the fig they developed in, leaves to find new figs to pollinate, continuing the cycle. Neither figs nor fig wasps can reproduce without the other. The system is so specific that a fig species in one region might have a different wasp species than the same fig species in another region. This coevolution has produced exquisite matching of fig and wasp, a partnership that has existed for millions of years. The diversity of flies in the cloud forest is staggering. Many are tiny, living in moss or decaying vegetation. Others are larger and more conspicuous. Flower flies mimic bees or wasps, gaining protection from their resemblance to stinging insects. Crane flies, resembling giant mosquitoes but harmless, emerge from streams where their larvae developed. Tachinid flies parasitize caterpillars and other insects, laying eggs on or in their hosts, their larvae eventually consuming the host from the inside. The parasitoid wasps represent an entire guild of species that use other insects as hosts for their developing larvae. Some are so tiny they can develop inside insect eggs. Others are larger, attacking caterpillars, beetle larvae, or other wasps. The female wasp locates a suitable host, often using sophisticated sensory systems that detect chemical cues, and lays an egg on or in it. The wasp larvae develops, consuming the host, but usually leaving vital organs until last, keeping the host alive and fresh as long as possible.
This parasitoid lifestyle has evolved independently in multiple insect groups, testament to its effectiveness as an evolutionary strategy. It also serves an ecological function, keeping herbivore populations in check, preventing any single species from becoming so abundant that it causes massive damage to vegetation. The sounds of the cloud forest at night are dominated by insects. The katydids produce their scraping songs. Crickets chirp from the leaf litter and vegetation. Cicadas, though less common than in lowland forests, occasionally add their whining buzz. Together, these sounds create a backdrop, a constant acoustic texture that changes with the seasons and with altitude, but never entirely disappears. The insects of Monteverde are the foundation of the ecosystem's food webs. They pollinate flowers, ensuring plant reproduction. They consume plant material, transferring energy from primary producers to higher trophic levels. They decompose organic matter, recycling nutrients. And they serve as food for countless predators, frogs, lizards, birds, bats, other insects, transferring energy upward through the system. Without insects, the cloud forest would collapse. The plants would go unpollinated, the decomposition would slow, the predators would starve. The entire intricate web of relationships that makes the cloud forest function would unravel. These tiny creatures, often overlooked or dismissed, are absolutely essential to the system's persistence. And yet, insect populations globally are declining, threatened by habitat loss, pesticides, climate change. Monteverde's insects appear relatively secure for now, protected within the reserve, but they are not immune to larger changes. Warming temperatures might push some species upslope beyond the available habitat. Changes in rainfall patterns might disrupt emergence timing or breeding cycles. These possibilities lurk as concerns, threats that have not yet materialized, but that could. For now, the insects still fill the cloud forest with their multitudes. The leafcutters still march in their columns. The morphos still flash their blue wings. The katydids still sing their night songs. And the forest still functions, still processes energy and cycles nutrients, still supports the astonishing diversity that makes Monteverde one of the most biologically rich places on Earth. Among all the trees of the cloud forest, the fig trees hold special significance. They are keystone species, organisms whose impact on the ecosystem is disproportionate to their abundance, species whose removal would trigger cascading changes throughout the system. And in Monteverde, as throughout tropical forests worldwide, figs play this critical role. Multiple fig species occur in the cloud forest, each with its own ecology, but all share certain characteristics. They produce fruit not seasonally, but throughout the year, with individual trees fruiting at different times, ensuring that some figs are always available somewhere in the forest. This continuous fruiting makes figs crucial resources during periods when other fruits are scarce. The strangler figs begin their lives as epiphytes, high in the canopy. A bird or bat defecates a fig seed onto a branch, and the seedling germinates in the moss or organic debris accumulated there. The seedling sends roots downward, not into soil initially, but through open air, reaching for the ground far below. These roots grow slowly downward, following the host tree's trunk, eventually reaching the soil and anchoring there. Once rooted, the fig grows more vigorously, sending additional roots down, thickening the existing ones, gradually surrounding the host tree's trunk in a lattice of roots. The fig's crown also grows, competing with the host tree for light. Over decades, the strangler roots fuse together, completely encasing the host tree's trunk. Eventually, the host tree dies, either shaded out by the fig's crown or strangled by the constricting roots. But the fig doesn't simply kill its host and collapse. The fused roots have created a hollow cylinder strong enough to support the fig's crown even after the host wood has completely rotted away. The result is a hollow fig tree, often with a space large enough to stand in, surrounding what used to be the host tree. This life strategy allows figs to reach the canopy without investing in growing their own trunk from the ground up, to compete with established trees from a position of advantage. It's ruthless but effective, and it creates distinctive trees with hollow centers that provide habitat for numerous animals. Bats roost in them, birds nest in cavities, reptiles and amphibians shelter in the spaces between roots. The strangler fig process can take 50 years or more from germination to the death of the host tree, a slow-motion conquest that nonetheless reshapes the forest. The gaps created when host trees die are partially filled by the fig's own crown, but the change in species composition affects the ecosystem. Different trees produce different resources, host different epiphytes, support different insect communities. The figs themselves, the fruits, not the trees, are unusual structures. What appears to be a fruit is actually a hollow container holding hundreds of tiny flowers inside.
The only entrance is a small opening at the apex, barely large enough for the specialized fig wasps to enter. After the wasps pollinate the flowers inside, the structure develops into the soft, sweet fig we recognize, each tiny, crunchy seed inside, representing a fertilized flower. This fruit is incredibly nutritious, high in sugars, and with a good calcium to phosphorus ratio, making it valuable food for frugivores. And because different fig trees fruit at different times, and because each tree can produce multiple crops per year, figs provide reliable resources when other fruits are unavailable. The list of animals that eat figs in Monteverde is extensive. Monkeys consume them eagerly. Kinkajous and other mammals feed on them. Dozens of bird species include figs in their diets: toucans, trogons, tanagers, flycatchers, many others. Bats, both fruit-eating species and others, feed on figs. Even fish in streams below fig trees sometimes eat figs that fall into the water. This makes fig trees gathering points, locations where multiple species converge to feed. A large fig tree in fruit can host a constantly changing assemblage of animals, creating opportunities for observation and interaction that wouldn't occur otherwise. Predators sometimes stake out fruiting figs, knowing prey will come to feed. The ecological importance of figs extends beyond just providing food. By fruiting year-round, they sustain frugivore populations through lean times when other fruit sources fail. Without figs, some frugivore populations might crash during food scarcity periods, creating cascades through the ecosystem. The year-round availability buffers against these fluctuations, stabilizing populations and maintaining ecosystem function. Figs also serve as resources for organisms beyond those that eat the fruit directly. The sap is consumed by certain insects, the leaves feed specialist herbivores, the bark hosts epiphytes, the hollow trunks provide roosting and nesting sites. A single large fig tree might support hundreds of species in various capacities. The mutualism with fig wasps mentioned earlier deserves further attention for its ecological and evolutionary implications. This partnership is ancient, dating back perhaps 90 million years, with figs and wasps co-evolving, each shaping the evolution of the other. The figs have evolved fruit structures that attract and support the wasps. The wasps have evolved behaviors and morphologies that allow them to navigate the fig's interior and pollinate the flowers. This specificity means that each fig species depends absolutely on its wasp species. If the wasp goes extinct, the fig cannot reproduce sexually and will eventually disappear. If the fig disappears, the wasp has no place to reproduce and also goes extinct. This mutual dependence creates vulnerability. Changes that affect one partner inevitably affect the other.
But it also creates resilience in a way, because both partners benefit from the relationship's continuation, creating selection pressure to maintain it. The system has persisted for millions of years through climate changes and habitat shifts, demonstrating that these intricate partnerships can be surprisingly durable if the basic ecological conditions remain suitable. The fig tree's role in the cloud forest exemplifies how ecosystems are built not just of species, but of relationships, not just of organisms, but of interactions. Remove the fig trees and you remove not just one species, but a web of dependencies. The frugivores that depend on year-round fig availability would struggle. The wasps would disappear. The hollow fig trunks that provide shelter would be lost. The ecosystem would remain, but it would be fundamentally altered, diminished, less resilient to other changes. This is what we mean by keystone species, organisms whose importance far exceeds what their numbers alone would suggest. Figs are not the most abundant trees in Monteverde, but they are among the most important, their presence woven into the fabric of the ecosystem in ways that make them essential to its functioning. Walking through the cloud forest, it's possible to pass fig trees without recognizing them, especially the young stranglers still working their way down to the ground. But knowing they're there, knowing the role they play, adds depth to the experience. That hollow tree is not just an interesting structure, but a former battleground where a fig slowly conquered its host.
Those birds calling from the canopy might be feeding on figs, sustaining themselves on resources that other trees cannot provide. The tiny wasps, invisible unless you know where to look, are maintaining a partnership that predates human civilization by millions of years. The fig trees stand as reminders that the cloud forest is not a collection of independent organisms, but a community, an assemblage of species connected by needs and dependencies, by partnerships and competitions, by relationships that create an integrated whole greater than the sum of its parts. To protect the forest is to protect not just trees and birds and frogs, but the relationships between them, the mutualisms and food webs and cycles that keep the system functioning. Water defines the cloud forest, but water does more than just sustain it. Water creates it, shapes it, flows through it in a constant cycle that connects the forest to the larger watershed, to the communities below, to the distant oceans that provide the moisture the trade winds carry inland. The streams of Monteverde run clear and cold, fed by fog drip and by the rains that soak the forest. They begin as tiny seeps, moisture percolating through the moss and organic matter of the forest floor, emerging from beneath roots and rocks, gathering into rivulets barely large enough to notice. These merge with other seeps, becoming small streams that trickle over moss-covered stones, creating miniature waterfalls only inches high. As the streams descend the mountainside, they grow, fed by tributaries, cutting deeper channels, beginning to shake the landscape. The water is remarkably clear, almost as pure as distilled water, because it has flowed through a forest that filters and cleanses it. There is no agricultural runoff here, no urban pollution, just water that has condensed from clouds and filtered through pristine forest. The clarity allows sunlight to penetrate, supporting algae that grows on stream rocks, creating food for aquatic insects. Mayfly nymphs graze this algae, stonefly nymphs hunt smaller insects, caddisfly larvae construct cases from tiny pebbles and organic material, protecting their soft bodies inside these architectural marvels. These insects spend months or even years as aquatic larvae, then emerge as winged adults, living only days or weeks in their winged form, just long enough to mate and lay eggs to start the next generation. During emergence events, when many individuals transform simultaneously, the air above the stream fills with delicate insects, and the birds gather to feast. The streams also host larger organisms. Tadpoles of glass frogs and other species develop in quieter pools. Freshwater crabs scuttle among the rocks. Small fish, gobies and others dart through the current. Salamander larvae, entirely aquatic with external gills, hunt tiny invertebrates in the stream bed. The streams create habitat not just in the water itself, but along their banks. The extra moisture supports lush vegetation, different in composition from the forest just meters away. Heliconia and gingers bloom along stream banks, visited by hermit hummingbirds that prefer these riparian zones. Ferns are even more abundant than in the general forest, and the constant sound of running water creates an acoustic backdrop distinct from the drip and rustle of the forest interior. Waterfalls, where streams encounter resistant rock layers or steep drops, create microhabitats of their own. The constant spray keeps nearby vegetation perpetually wet, favoring bryophytes and certain ferns. The pool at the base of a waterfall, deeper and more permanent than most stream sections, provides habitat for larger animals, bathing birds, drinking mammals, breeding frogs. The water flowing through these streams represents more than just H2O. It carries dissolved nutrients leached from the forest, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, trace elements. It transports organic matter, fallen leaves, insect carcasses, fecal material from terrestrial animals. This water and its cargo feed the lowland rivers and eventually the ocean, exporting the cloud forest's productivity to other ecosystems. But the forest also retains water, holds it, releases it slowly rather than allowing it to rush immediately downslope. The moss acts as a sponge, absorbing rain and fog, releasing it gradually over days or weeks. The thick organic matter of the forest floor similarly retains water, and the vegetation itself, the leaves, the epiphytes, the thick canopy, intercept rain and fog, allowing it to drip slowly rather than falling directly to the ground. This water retention and slow release has enormous importance for the communities below Monteverde. The streams that emerge from the cloud forest provide year-round water supply to towns, farms, and cities in the lowlands. Even during dry season, when rainfall ceases for months in the lowlands, the streams from Monteverde continue to flow, fed by fog drip and by the gradual release of water stored in the forest's sponge-like structure. Remove the forest, and this buffering disappears. Rain that falls on cleared land runs quickly, creating floods during storms and leaving streams dry between rains. The fog that drifts through has nothing to condense on, passes through without contributing moisture. The year-round water supply becomes seasonal and unreliable. This ecosystem service, watershed protection, and water provision gives the cloud forest economic value beyond just ecotourism. The water it provides is worth millions of dollars annually, supporting agriculture, hydroelectric generation, and human consumption. Some economists argue this service alone justifies protecting the forest, even without considering biodiversity, carbon storage, or other benefits. The fog drip phenomenon deserves special attention because it's one of the cloud forest's most distinctive hydrological features. As fog flows through the forest, tiny droplets suspended in air contact leaves, branches, and especially the abundant epiphytes. These droplets condense on these surfaces, coalesce into larger drops, and fall to the forest floor as fog drip or horizontal precipitation. The amount can be substantial, equivalent to 30 inches of rainfall annually or more, beyond what falls as actual rain. This means the forest is harvesting moisture from passing clouds, capturing water that would otherwise simply blow through without contributing to the local water budget. The rougher the surface, the better it captures fog. This is why the mossy, epiphyte-laden branches of cloud forest trees are so effective at fog interception.
This creates a positive feedback loop. The forest harvests fog, which creates moisture that supports the epiphytes and moss that make the forest effective at harvesting fog. Remove the forest, and the fog harvesting capacity disappears, reducing moisture, making it harder for forest to regenerate, potentially creating a stable, cleared state where forest cannot recover without assistance. Climate change threatens this system. If warming temperatures cause the cloud base to rise up the mountainside, the elevation band where Monteverde sits might receive less cloud cover, reducing fog drip, stressing the moisture-dependent vegetation and animals. Some models predict this could convert cloud forest to a drier ecosystem type, causing the loss of cloud forest specialists. The streams themselves could change. Reduced fog drip would mean less year-round water input, potentially causing streams to dry out during dry season where they currently flow continuously. This would eliminate stream-breeding amphibians, reduce habitat for aquatic insects, affect the downstream communities that depend on reliable water supplies. But for now, the streams still flow, clear and constant. The waterfalls still cascade over moss-covered rocks. The fog still condenses and drips, feeding the system, maintaining the humidity that defines the cloud forest. The water cycle still functions, connecting atmosphere to forest, to stream, to river, to ocean, and back to atmosphere again in an endless loop that has sustained this ecosystem for millennia. To stand beside a Monteverde stream, watching the water flow past, knowing it condensed from clouds that originated over the Caribbean, that it filtered through pristine forest, that it will eventually reach the Pacific, is to understand the interconnectedness of ecosystems, the way water links habitats across vast distances. The drop of water in the stream before you was recently vapor in the air. Soon it will be vapor again, lifted by evaporation or transpiration, returning to the clouds to begin another cycle. This movement, this endless cycling, is as fundamental to the cloud forest as the trees and birds and frogs.
It is the engine that drives the system, the resource that makes the extraordinary diversity possible, the thread that connects Monteverde to the planet's larger hydrological systems. The modern story of Monteverde begins in 1951, when a small group of Quakers from Alabama, seeking to avoid military conscription and wanting to live peacefully in a place where they could farm without supporting military activities, arrived in Costa Rica's mountainside forests. They chose this remote area for its isolation, its cooler climate suitable for dairy farming, and the fact that Costa Rica had recently abolished its military, aligning with Quaker pacifist values. The Quaker settlers established a community, cleared land for pasture, brought in cattle, and began producing cheese, an unusual product in Costa Rica at the time, but one that their mountainside location made feasible. The cheese operation proved successful, providing economic sustenance for the community and eventually becoming a significant local industry. But the Quakers also brought a conservation ethic, a belief in stewardship and living lightly on the land. They recognized early on that the forest around them was extraordinary, biologically rich and unique, and they worried about the deforestation occurring throughout Costa Rica. Forests falling to agriculture and development, species losing habitat at alarming rates. In 1972, with encouragement from visiting biologist George Powell, the community purchased land to protect the forest's watershed, the source of water for their community and for the lowlands below. This was the beginning of what would become the Monteverde Cloud Forest Preserve, now one of Costa Rica's most visited protected areas and one of the world's most important cloud forest conservation sites. The preserve has grown over the decades through additional purchases and donations, now encompassing over 35,000 acres of protected cloud forest. It's managed by the Tropical Science Center, a Costa Rican nonprofit, and attracts roughly 70,000 visitors annually, making it both a conservation success and a significant economic engine for the region. The arrival of ecotourism transformed Monteverde from an isolated agricultural community to an international destination. Hotels, restaurants, guide services, and other tourism infrastructure developed. The local economy shifted from primarily agriculture to primarily tourism, with the cloud forest itself becoming the main attraction. This transformation brought benefits. Jobs were created, income increased. Young people found opportunities in tourism that kept them in the community rather than forcing them to migrate to cities. International attention focused on the cloud forest, bringing scientific researchers, conservation funding, and political will to protect it. But tourism also brought challenges. The infrastructure required, roads, buildings, utilities, fragments habitat and creates disturbance. Visitor numbers, even when carefully managed, create impacts. Trails erode, wildlife is disturbed, noise and light pollution increase. The economic dependence on tourism makes the community vulnerable to fluctuations in visitor numbers, whether from economic recessions, political instability, or global events like pandemics. Balancing conservation and tourism requires constant attention and adjustment. Visitor numbers must be managed to prevent overuse. Trail maintenance must control erosion while providing access. Regulations must protect sensitive areas while allowing reasonable visitor experiences. And the economic benefits must flow to local communities, creating incentives for conservation rather than resentment of restrictions. Monteverde has navigated these challenges relatively successfully. The preserve limits visitor numbers and closes certain areas entirely. Guides are required for some trails, ensuring that visitors learn about the forest and that their behavior is monitored. Development in the buffer zones around the preserve is regulated, though imperfectly. And community involvement in tourism means that local people benefit directly from conservation. The research program at Monteverde has contributed enormously to tropical ecology. The Monteverde Cloud Forest Preserve and the Children's Eternal Rainforest provide long-term study sites where researchers have investigated everything from seed dispersal to climate change impacts, from hummingbird energetics to epiphyte diversity. Decades of data have accumulated, creating baseline information against which changes can be measured. The golden toad's extinction was documented here, one of the first clear cases of climate-driven amphibian decline and a warning about the vulnerability of cloud forest species. Studies of altitudinal migration by quetzals and other birds have revealed how species track resources across elevational gradients, showing the importance of protecting whole mountainsides rather than just isolated peaks or valleys. Research on the ecological relationships in cloud forests, the fig-wasp mutualisms, the hummingbird-flower coevolution, the epiphyte gardens, and their inhabitants have shown how interdependent tropical species are, how conservation must consider not just individual species, but entire networks of interactions. And climate monitoring has revealed worrying trends. Temperatures have increased, rainfall patterns have shifted, mist frequency has changed. The cloud base appears to be rising, potentially pushing the cloud forest ecosystem upslope, compressing the elevational range available to cloud forest specialists. These changes haven't yet caused catastrophic ecosystem collapse, but they suggest that larger changes may be coming. Species that can move upslope may do so. Species already at the highest elevations have nowhere to go. The carefully balanced web of relationships that makes the cloud forest function may begin to unravel as temperature shifts and moisture availability changes, disrupt phenologies and distributions. The community response to these threats has been proactive. Conservation corridors are being established to connect protected areas, allowing species to shift their ranges. Reforestation projects are restoring degraded areas, increasing habitat extent. Climate monitoring continues, tracking changes and allowing early detection of problems. And education programs teach both visitors and local residents about the importance of the cloud forest and the need to protect it.
A sloth, motionless during the day, begins its slow journey to a different tree, moving with such deliberate slowness that motion is barely perceptible. A night monkey, one of the few truly nocturnal primates, bounces through the mid-canopy, its large eyes gathering the minimal light available. And the cats, ocelots, margays, begin their hunts, moving silently through the darkness, their eyes reflecting any stray beam of light like twin emeralds. The male quetzal has taken his place in the nest cavity now, settling onto the eggs, his long tail plumes protruding from the entrance hole, invisible in the darkness. His mate has departed to feed and rest during her 12-hour break from incubation duties. In 17 days, if all goes well, the eggs will hatch, beginning a new generation, continuing the line that stretches back through millennia of quetzal ancestors, back to the origin of the species, back to the evolutionary processes that created such extraordinary beauty. The preservation of Monteverde is, in the end, about allowing these processes to continue. It's about ensuring that quetzals can still nest, that hummingbirds can still find flowers, that frogs can still breed in bromeliad tanks, that the intricate web of relationships that makes the ecosystem function remains intact. It's about maintaining the conditions, the constant mist, the stable temperatures, the complex structure that make this particular assemblage of species possible. But it's also about something less tangible, harder to quantify. It's about preserving wonder, about maintaining places where humans can encounter nature in something approaching its full complexity and beauty. It's about humility, about recognizing that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that we exist within ecosystems, not separate from them, and that our fate is tied to theirs. The cloud forest asks nothing of us except that we leave it space to exist, that we don't destroy it in pursuit of short-term gains, that we recognize its value beyond what can be immediately extracted or exploited. This is not a difficult request, yet it's one that humanity has struggled to honor. We have cleared more than we've protected, destroyed more than we've preserved, taken more than we've sustained. Monteverde stands as a counterexample, a place where different choices were made, where protection took precedence over exploitation, where the long view triumphed over immediate gain.
It is not perfect, no human endeavor is, but it demonstrates what's possible when conservation is prioritized, when communities value their natural heritage, when science and stewardship work together. The mist thickens further as the night progresses, condensing on every surface, dripping steadily. This is the cloud forest's lifeblood, the moisture that makes everything else possible, delivered reliably by the trade winds, harvested by the epiphyte-laden branches, channeled into streams that feed the lowlands. As long as this cycle continues, as long as the clouds still come, the forest persists. But what if the clouds stop coming? What if warming temperatures push them higher up the mountains above Monteverde's elevation? This is not a hypothetical. It is a possible future, perhaps even a probable one, if greenhouse gas emissions continue unchecked. The cloud forest exists within a narrow envelope of conditions, and climate change threatens to alter those conditions beyond what the ecosystem can tolerate. This makes Monteverde not just a preserve, but a warning. It shows us what we stand to lose if we fail to address climate change. It demonstrates that even protected areas, even carefully managed reserves, are vulnerable to disruptions that operate at global scales. And it reminds us that conservation is not just about protecting places from direct destruction, but about maintaining the climatic and atmospheric conditions that make those places possible. The stars wheel overhead, visible in gaps in the cloud cover, the same stars that guided ancient navigators, that inspired myth and story in cultures around the world, that mark time's passage in their slow procession across the heavens. They shine down on the cloud forest with light that left them years or decades or centuries ago, light that has traveled across vast distances to reach this small patch of forest on a mountainside in Costa Rica. And in that forest, life continues its ancient patterns. Predators hunt, prey evade, plants photosynthesize and grow, fungi decompose organic matter, bacteria fix nitrogen, the cycles turn, energy flows, nutrients circulate, the ecosystem functions, a vast interlocking system of processes and relationships, none of which understand their role in the whole, but all of which, together, create something far greater than any individual component. This is what we protect when we protect Monteverde, not just species, not just scenery, but functioning ecosystems, living processes, evolutionary potential. We protect the possibility of discovery, the opportunity for wonder, the chance for future generations to experience what we have experienced. We protect something older than human civilization, something that will outlast us if we allow it to, something that deserves to persist for its own sake, regardless of its utility to humans. The night deepens towards its midpoint. The moon, waxing towards full, rises above the eastern ridges, its light filtering through the mist, creating an ethereal glow. The forest is never truly dark. Bioluminescent fungi glow softly on rotting logs. Fireflies trace arcs through the air. The eyes of nocturnal animals reflect any available light. Life continues, visible or hidden, filling every available niche, exploiting every resource, demonstrating the remarkable capacity of evolution to generate diversity. In a few hours, dawn will begin to break, the sky lightening in the east, the mist thinning slightly in the morning warmth. The night shift will retire, the bats to their roosts, the night monkeys to their sleeping sites, the owls to hidden perches. And the day shift will emerge, birds beginning their dawn chorus, diurnal mammals starting their rounds, the forest awakening to another day. The male quetzal will relinquish the nest to his mate, emerging from the cavity with his tail plumes streaming behind him, catching the first light, transforming into a vision of emerald and gold. He will feed, call, defend his territory, all the behaviors that define his existence, all the adaptations that have made him what he is. And visitors will arrive, walking the trails in search of quetzals and other cloud forest wonders, hoping to glimpse the resplendent bird, hoping to experience the magic of this misty realm. Some will see quetzals, some won't. All will encounter the cloud forest in its mossy abundance, its constant drip, its green upon green complexity. and perhaps some will leave with a deeper appreciation for what exists here, for why it matters, for what would be lost if we fail to protect it. This is the story of Monteverde, of clouds and forest, of moss and orchids, of streams and waterfalls, of frogs and salamanders, of insects beyond counting, of relationships intricate beyond complete comprehension. It is a story that has unfolded over millions of years, shaped by evolution and ecology, by geology and climate, by the unique circumstances that created this particular place. But it is also a story that includes us, humans who have chosen to protect rather than destroy, who have recognized value beyond economic return, who have committed to stewardship. Our role in this story is brief, a few decades or centuries in a narrative spanning millennia, but it may prove decisive. The choices we make now will determine whether future generations inherit intact cloud forests or only degraded remnants, whether the resplendent Quetzal continues its existence or joins the golden toad in extinction. The forest waits, patient, indifferent to human concerns, operating on timescales that make our urgency seem frantic, our lives ephemeral. It will be here tomorrow and next year and perhaps for centuries more, as long as the clouds keep coming, as long as we allow it space to persist, as long as the delicate balance holds. And in that persistence is hope, hope that beauty endures, that complexity survives, that the world retains places of wonder and mystery, places where evolution's artistry remains visible, places where humans can encounter nature's abundance and be humbled by it, inspired by it, transformed by it. The mist flows through the forest, as it has for countless nights before this one, as it will for countless nights to come if we choose wisely. It condenses on moss and leaves, drips to the forest floor, feeds the streams, sustains the ecosystem. It is constant and reliable, the heartbeat of the cloud forest, the rhythm to which all life here adapts. And somewhere in the canopy, invisible in the darkness and mist, a resplendent Quetzal rests, a living jewel, a symbol of what we stand to preserve or lose, a reminder that some things are so beautiful, so extraordinary, so irreplaceable that they must be protected, not for what they give us, but for what they are. The night deepens towards its midpoint, the moon, waxing towards full, rises above the eastern ridges, its light filtering through the mist, creating an ethereal glow. The forest is never truly dark. Bioluminescent fungi glow softly on rotting logs, fireflies trace arcs through the air, the eyes of nocturnal animals reflect any available light. Life continues, visible or hidden, filling every available niche, exploiting every
Monteverde stands as an example of what conservation can achieve when local communities, scientists, and outside supporters work together. The forest is not pristine. Humans live here, farm here, visit here, but it is largely intact, its ecological processes functioning, its biodiversity remarkably preserved. This is not wilderness conservation in the traditional sense, but lived-in conservation, finding ways for humans and nature to coexist beneficially. The model isn't perfect, and it isn't easily exported to other contexts. Monteverde's success depended on particular circumstances: the Quaker community's conservation ethic, Costa Rica's political stability and progressive environmental policies, the development of ecotourism at the right time to provide economic alternatives to deforestation. But it demonstrates that conservation is possible, that protecting tropical forests while allowing human presence and use can work when approached thoughtfully. The children of the original Quaker settlers still live in Monteverde, many of them involved in tourism or conservation. The cheese factory still operates, now a tourist attraction as well as a functioning dairy operation. And the forest still stands, mist still flowing through it, quetzals still nesting in its old trees, the streams still running clear. This persistence, this survival of the cloud forest in a world where so many forests have fallen is worth celebrating, but it's also worth remembering how fragile the achievement is,
how many threats remain, how easily what has been protected could be lost if vigilance falters, or if the larger forces of climate change and economic pressure overwhelm local conservation efforts. The late afternoon light filters through the canopy in slanting beams, made visible by the mist that never entirely leaves the cloud forest. The trails, which saw their heaviest traffic in the morning when visitors hoped to glimpse quetzals, have grown quiet now. A few lingering hikers make their way back toward the entrance, but mostly the forest is returning to itself, to the rhythms that existed long before humans arrived and will, we hope, continue long after we are gone. In the canopy far above, a three-wattled bellbird makes its final calls of the day, the metallic bonk carrying through the trees, announcing territory, advertising presence, connecting with others of its kind across the misty distances. The sound fades, absorbed by the moss and leaves, by the dense humid air that muffles and softens all sharp edges. A resplendent quetzal, a male in full breeding plumage, perches on a dead snag 50 feet up. His long tail plumes hang motionless, iridescent green in the dimming light. He has spent the day alternating between the nest cavity, where his mate incubates their 2 eggs, and the aguacatillo trees where he feeds. Now, as evening approaches, he rests, conserving energy for the night shift of incubation that will begin soon. The bird's presence here, in this particular tree, in this particular forest, is the product of millions of years of evolution, of adaptations refined across countless generations. But it also depends on choices made by humans in the last few decades. Choices to protect rather than clear this forest, to value it as something more than potential farmland or timber, to recognize that some things are worth preserving for their own sake and for the services they provide. Down on the forest floor, a glass frog begins to call from the vegetation overhanging a stream. Its voice is a soft peeping, barely audible over the constant sound of water flowing over rocks. Other frogs join in, creating a tentative chorus that will build as darkness deepens, each species adding its voice to the evening symphony. The temperature drops slightly as the sun's warmth fades, though the change is minimal. In the cloud forest, day and night temperatures differ by only a few degrees. The mist thickens, condensing more freely as evening cool settles in. Droplets form on every surface, coalescing, growing heavy, falling in the constant drip that characterizes the cloud forest soundscape. In a bromeliad tank high in the canopy, a female poison dart frog tends her tadpoles, having climbed up from the forest floor where she laid her eggs in moist leaf litter weeks ago. She carries more eggs with her today, unfertilized ones that she will deposit in the tank as food for her developing offspring. This parental care, so unusual for amphibians, represents an investment that increases the chances that at least some of her tadpoles will survive to metamorphosis. A kinkajou emerges from its den in a hollow tree, stretching and yawning before beginning its nightly rounds. Its prehensile tail wraps around branches as it moves through the canopy, heading for a fig tree it knows is fruiting. The night shift is beginning, the nocturnal creatures stirring as the diurnal ones settle for sleep. The scientist's cathedral, that's what one researcher called the cloud forest, comparing it to the great churches of Europe, structures built over generations to inspire awe and contemplation. But the cloud forest outdoes any human architecture in age, in complexity, in the intricate beauty of its construction. It is a cathedral built by evolution, by the patient work of natural selection operating across deep time, creating a structure of almost unimaginable sophistication. Research continues here, always revealing new layers, new relationships, new species. A recent survey discovered dozens of beetle species previously unknown to science. Studies of moss genetics revealed diversity far greater than morphology alone suggested. Long-term monitoring of bird populations documented subtle shifts in distributions, species moving upslope in response to warming temperatures. Each discovery adds to our understanding while simultaneously revealing how much we don't know. For every question answered, two more emerge. How will the ecosystem respond to continued climate change? What are the thresholds beyond which the system begins to collapse? Which species are most vulnerable? Which relationships are most critical to maintain? The research station, quiet now in the evening, will resume activity tomorrow. Scientists will check their experiments, download data from automated sensors, head out on trails to collect samples or make observations. Graduate students will pursue their dissertation research. Visiting researchers will collaborate with local counterparts, sharing knowledge and training the next generation of tropical ecologists. This knowledge, accumulating year by year, becomes both a record of what is and a baseline against which future changes can be measured. The data collected today will be valuable decades from now when researchers want to understand how the ecosystem has changed, what has been lost, what persists, what unexpected adaptations have emerged. But knowledge alone cannot protect the cloud forest. It requires action, requires continued vigilance, requires resources and political will and community support. It requires recognizing that conservation is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing process, a commitment that must be renewed with each generation. The threats are real and growing. Climate change proceeds faster than many models predicted. Development pressure increases as human populations grow and as demand for resources expands. Invasive species arrive, accidentally introduced or deliberately planted, beginning to spread through the forest. Diseases like chytridiomycosis continue to affect amphibians, and the economic model built on ecotourism proves vulnerable to disruptions. Yet there are reasons for hope. The younger generation in Monteverde, growing up with conservation as a fundamental value, shows strong commitment to protecting the forest. International cooperation provides resources and expertise. New technologies, camera traps, acoustic monitoring, genetic analysis, satellite imagery allow more effective research and enforcement. And growing global awareness of biodiversity's importance and of ecosystem services' value creates political support for conservation. The forest itself demonstrates resilience. Areas that were cleared decades ago have regenerated when given the chance. Species populations that crashed have recovered. The ecosystem, wounded but not destroyed, persists, adapts, continues to function. This resilience is not infinite. There are thresholds beyond which recovery becomes impossible, but it suggests that with sufficient protection and with some luck, the cloud forest can survive the challenges ahead. As full darkness settles over Monteverde, the forest transforms completely. The visual experience, dominant during daylight, yields to sound and smell. The frog chorus builds to full volume, multiple species calling simultaneously, creating a wall of sound. The moths emerge, visiting night-blooming flowers, evading hunting bats, whose echolocation calls pierce the ultrasonic frequencies above human hearing.
A sloth, motionless during the day, begins its slow journey to a different tree, moving with such deliberate slowness that motion is barely perceptible. A night monkey, one of the few truly nocturnal primates, bounces through the mid-canopy, its large eyes gathering the minimal light available. And the cats, ocelots, margays, begin their hunts, moving silently through the darkness, their eyes reflecting any stray beam of light like twin emeralds. The male Quetzal has taken his place in the nest cavity now, settling onto the eggs, his long tail plumes protruding from the entrance hole, invisible in the darkness. His mate has departed to feed and rest during her 12-hour break from incubation duties. In 17 days, if all goes well, the eggs will hatch, beginning a new generation, continuing the line that stretches back through millennia of Quetzal ancestors, back to the origin of the species, back to the evolutionary processes that created such extraordinary beauty. The preservation of Monteverde is, in the end, about allowing these processes to continue.
It's about ensuring that quetzals can still nest, that hummingbirds can still find flowers, that frogs can still breed in bromeliad tanks, that the intricate web of relationships that makes the ecosystem function remains intact. It's about maintaining the conditions, the constant mist, the stable temperatures, the complex structure that make this particular assemblage of species possible. But it's also about something less tangible, harder to quantify. It's about preserving wonder, about maintaining places where humans can encounter nature in something approaching its full complexity and beauty. It's about humility, about recognizing that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that we exist within ecosystems, not separate from them, and that our fate is tied to theirs. The cloud forest asks nothing of us except that we leave it space to exist, that we don't destroy it in pursuit of short-term gains, that we recognize its value beyond what can be immediately extracted or exploited. This is not a difficult request, yet it's one that humanity has struggled to honor. We have cleared more than we've protected, destroyed more than we've preserved, taken more than we've sustained. Monteverde stands as a counterexample, a place where different choices were made, where protection took precedence over exploitation, where the long view triumphed over immediate gain. It is not perfect, no human endeavor is, but it demonstrates what's possible when conservation is prioritized, when communities value their natural heritage, when science and stewardship work together. The mist thickens further as the night progresses, condensing on every surface, dripping steadily. This is the cloud forest's lifeblood, the moisture that makes everything else possible, delivered reliably by the trade winds, harvested by the epiphyte-laden branches, channeled into streams that feed the lowlands. As long as this cycle continues, as long as the clouds still come, the forest persists. But what if the clouds stop coming? What if warming temperatures push them higher up the mountains above Monteverde's elevation? This is not a hypothetical. It is a possible future, perhaps even a probable one, if greenhouse gas emissions continue unchecked. The cloud forest exists within a narrow envelope of conditions, and climate change threatens to alter those conditions beyond what the ecosystem can tolerate. This makes Monteverde not just a preserve, but a warning. It shows us what we stand to lose if we fail to address climate change. It demonstrates that even protected areas, even carefully managed reserves, are vulnerable to disruptions that operate at global scales. And it reminds us that conservation is not just about protecting places from direct destruction, but about maintaining the climatic and atmospheric conditions that make those places possible. The stars wheel overhead, visible in gaps in the cloud cover, the same stars that guided ancient navigators, that inspired myth and story in cultures around the world, that mark time's passage in their slow procession across the heavens. They shine down on the cloud forest with light that left them years or decades or centuries ago, light that has traveled across vast distances to reach this small patch of forest on a mountainside in Costa Rica. And in that forest, life continues its ancient patterns. Predators hunt, prey evade, plants photosynthesize and grow, fungi decompose organic matter, bacteria fix nitrogen, the cycles turn, energy flows, nutrients circulate, the ecosystem functions, a vast interlocking system of processes and relationships, none of which understand their role in the whole, but all of which, together, create something far greater than any individual component. This is what we protect when we protect Monteverde, not just species, not just scenery, but functioning ecosystems, living processes, evolutionary potential. We protect the possibility of discovery, the opportunity for wonder, the chance for future generations to experience what we have experienced. We protect something older than human civilization, something that will outlast us if we allow it to, something that deserves to persist for its own sake, regardless of its utility to humans. The night deepens towards its midpoint. The moon, waxing towards full, rises above the eastern ridges, its light filtering through the mist, creating an ethereal glow. The forest is never truly dark. Bioluminescent fungi glow softly on rotting logs. Fireflies trace arcs through the air. The eyes of nocturnal animals reflect any available light. Life continues, visible or hidden, filling every available niche, exploiting every resource, demonstrating the remarkable capacity of evolution to generate diversity. In a few hours, dawn will begin to break, the sky lightening in the east, the mist thinning slightly in the morning warmth. The night shift will retire, the bats to their roosts, the night monkeys to their sleeping sites, the owls to hidden perches. And the day shift will emerge, birds beginning their dawn chorus, diurnal mammals starting their rounds, the forest awakening to another day. The male Quetzal will relinquish the nest to his mate, emerging from the cavity with his tail plumes streaming behind him, catching the first light, transforming into a vision of emerald and gold. He will feed, call, defend his territory, all the behaviors that define his existence, all the adaptations that have made him what he is. And visitors will arrive, walking the trails in search of Quetzals and other cloud forest wonders, hoping to glimpse the resplendent bird, hoping to experience the magic of this misty realm. Some will see Quetzals, some won't. All will encounter the cloud forest in its mossy abundance, its constant drip, its green upon green complexity. And perhaps some will leave with a deeper appreciation for what exists here, for why it matters, for what would be lost if we fail to protect it. This is the story of Monteverde, of clouds and forest, of moss and orchids, of streams and waterfalls, of frogs and salamanders, of insects beyond counting, of relationships intricate beyond complete comprehension. It is a story that has unfolded over millions of years, shaped by evolution and ecology, by geology and climate, by the unique circumstances that created this particular place. But it is also a story that includes us, humans who have chosen to protect rather than destroy, who have recognized value beyond economic return, who have committed to stewardship. Our role in this story is brief, a few decades or centuries in a narrative spanning millennia, but it may prove decisive. The choices we make now will determine whether future generations inherit intact cloud forests or only degraded remnants, whether the resplendent Quetzal continues its existence or joins the golden toad in extinction. The forest waits, patient, indifferent to human concerns, operating on timescales that make our urgency seem frantic, our lives ephemeral. It will be here tomorrow and next year and perhaps for centuries more, as long as the clouds keep coming, as long as we allow it space to persist, as long as the delicate balance holds. And in that persistence is hope, hope that beauty endures, that complexity survives, that the world retains places of wonder and mystery, places where evolution's artistry remains visible, places where humans can encounter nature's abundance and be humbled by it, inspired by it, transformed by it. The mist flows through the forest, as it has for countless nights before this one, as it will for countless nights to come if we choose wisely. It condenses on moss and leaves, drips to the forest floor, feeds the streams, sustains the ecosystem. It is constant and reliable, the heartbeat of the cloud forest, the rhythm to which all life here adapts. And somewhere in the canopy, invisible in the darkness and mist, a resplendent Quetzal rests, a living jewel, a symbol of what we stand to preserve or lose, a reminder that some things are so beautiful, so extraordinary, so irreplaceable that they must be protected, not for what they give us, but for what they are. The night deepens towards its midpoint. The moon, waxing towards full, rises above the eastern ridges, its light filtering through the mist, creating an ethereal glow. The forest is never truly dark. Bioluminescent fungi glow softly on rotting logs. Fireflies trace arcs through the air. The eyes of nocturnal animals reflect any available light. Life continues, visible or hidden, filling every available niche, exploiting every